So thank you. Thank you, Marcy. All right. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'd like to call the regular meeting of the Los Altos School District Board of Trustees to order. A recording and/or broadcast of this meeting is being made at the direction of the board, and the recording and/or broadcast may capture images and sounds of those attending the meeting. I will now call the roll. Jessica Spicer. Oh, you're on mute.
I know, and my Zoom decided to go away when I tried. I'm here.
Thank you. Steve Taglio.
Here.
Brian Johnson.
Here.
Vladimir Ivanovich.
Here.
I, Waishali Sirke, am here too. So we're all here tonight. All right, we'll move on to agenda approval. Would any board members like to provide comment on the agenda? Nope. Okay, then may I please have a motion to approve tonight's agenda?
So moved.
Thank you, Vladimir. May I please have a second?
I second.
Thank you, Jessica. Motion to approve tonight's agenda was made by Vladimir and seconded by Jessica. We'll now do a roll call vote. Jessica?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
Vladimir?
Yes.
I too vote yes. Motion passes unanimously. On to closed session report. No action was taken in closed session tonight, so I have nothing to report. This is one of my favorite ones. Staff celebration. Mrs. McGonigal.
Absolutely. Well, I'm hoping Candace is here and is going to pop up, but we are thrilled to let the board and the community know that Candace Marquis, who is one of our physical education elementary teachers, recently completed and received her national board certification. And we've talked about this before, but this is really an amazing accomplishment of our teachers who really take their profession very seriously and go through a rigorous multi-year program to become national board certified. And so Candace is a great example of our outstanding teachers. Candace teaches in a non-pandemic year, typically at Covington as our PE specialist there. But this year she is certainly teaching across several of our campuses, including Covington. So we are just so thrilled that Candace received her board certification and look forward to celebrating her great teaching with our students for the remainder of the year and forward.
Thank you, Sandra, and congratulations to Candace on your achievement. It's fabulous. Okay, moving on. Superintendent's update. Mr. Bear.
Yes, Shelley, I'm gonna, in light of the fact we have a pretty loaded agenda, I'll incorporate it into the reopening.
Okay, thank you. Moving on to the consent calendar. Would any board members like to provide comment on the consent agenda? Okay, seeing none. May I please have a motion to approve consent items E1 through E3?
So moved.
Thank you, Vladimir. May I have a second?
Seconded.
Thank you, Jessica. Okay, motion to approve consent items E1 through E3 was made by Vladimir and seconded by Jessica. I will now take a roll call vote. Jessica?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
Vladimir?
Yes.
I too vote yes. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, employee request to address the board from the Los Altos Teachers Association, Amanda Zongi.
Hello, board.
Hi.
Hi. Just making sure I'm on. Teachers have been working hard over the last few weeks to complete trimester 2 report cards. We are also almost through our arduous month of March, looking forward to spring break. We appreciate the continued collaboration between LHA and LASD. As we look ahead to the next few months left in this year, it is our hope that LASD listens with intention to all teacher voices regarding the impacts of 5 days a week in-person learning. Teachers have many concerns of the foreseeable changes ahead. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Amanda. Speaking for the California School Employees Association, Elena Shea.
Hi, good evening.
Hi, Elena.
I don't have much to say. I'm looking forward to some of the agenda items, one more than others, but all of them look very interesting. It's going to be a good meeting tonight, and spring break is coming up, but a lot of our CSA employees will be doing deep cleaning at our campuses that week. So we'll be hard at work during that week too. Thank you.
Thank you, Elena. We'll now move on to community comments. This time is reserved for citizens and employees to address the board on items that are not on the agenda. The board is not permitted to discuss or take action on non-agenda items, except to instruct the superintendent to review the matter further, report back to the board at a subsequent meeting, or place the matter on a future agenda. The board may make a brief comment or ask clarifying questions. We will now take public comment on this agenda item. To comment on this agenda item, members of the public should use the raise hand button if using the Zoom app, or press *9 if using your phone. Your name will be announced when it is your turn to speak. Prior to providing your comment, please be sure your microphone is on. Each speaker will be given 3 minutes. And I see we have someone.
Our first speaker is Tomer Sharon.
Hey, thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to speak. I'm curious to hear in this meeting what the plans are to return to 5 days a week. I think I'm curious to understand what else needs to happen for the schools to reopen. I think now that the science clearly suggests that 3 feet is sufficient and safe. The fact that vaccines are available. We as parents have followed, students have followed all the guidelines throughout the year, and I think the result is that we have almost no COVID at our schools. In fact, Springer, I think it's one of my kids' schools, or 2 of them, has had 0 cases of COVID among the teachers. I think as taxpayers, we've agreed to, or not agreed, but we have spent a lot of money as well. I think $115,000 this month for COVID tests in a district that has very little COVID. Everybody's received raises among the staff and teachers. And so, I think we've done a lot. We've done everything we've been asked, and it's not clear what's standing between us and reopening the schools now that the science suggests it's okay. And so I'm just curious what else we have to do as parents.
Summer, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but that is an item on the agenda.
Oh, okay. I'm not allowed to talk about. Okay, sorry about that. I misunderstood.
No, that's totally fine. This time is for non-agenda.
But if we're discussing that, then awesome. Okay, sorry about that then.
Right, but your comments are noted for the next agenda item.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any more hands raised for community comments. So I'm going to move on to the next agenda item. School reopening update. Staff will review the progress on the return of students to campuses. Mr. Bear.
Yes, good evening. Marcy, go ahead and start the slides. Last time we met on March 8th, there were some instructions given, direction given to the staff. So I want to return with that, but I also want to update the board on current status in our schools. So go ahead, next slide. All of our grade levels are back in session now. Transitional kindergarten through 8th grade in a blended or hybrid format. Our 8th graders returned last week, so the junior high schools are fully back as well. So we're happy to welcome them back, and thanks to the board members who were able to make it out and welcome our students and staff back. Next slide.
Hey, Jeff, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I think we're getting some maybe paper noise from, I don't know if your slides are close to your microphone, but.
Thank you. So this is a slide table you've seen for a number of weeks, just sharing with you the number of actual COVID cases that we have had on campuses, and actually not always on campus. Oftentimes we catch them before they come to a campus, but they're still associated with a campus. So this is, we have a total of 31 COVID cases over the past 5, almost 6 months. 2 of those were at the district office level, so you don't see them on this particular table. Important to note also, we have had 0 cases for 2 consecutive weeks, the last 2 weeks. And during the time, our county has moved into the orange level tier, or I'm sorry, the red level tier. And tomorrow, again, the state of California releases the tier data, and it's anticipated the county will likely move into the orange level on Wednesday, but we shall see. All in all, it really indicates that there's low COVID activity right now in the county, and if you look up here in the Northwest County, there's even less. So we're pleased about that, and I think this all really indicates that the work we're doing is paying off, which moves us into the next slide. You've seen this before as well. This is what we have really centered our work around, and we have been successful. We've, by any measure, really been able to stem the transmission on our campuses, really keeping the health and safety of our students and staff at the forefront. Again, we understand that the best instructional model for students is in person, and we're working toward that. This idea of letting science guide our decisions is something that we have also had success around, really attending to the direction given by the experts in epidemiology and medicine. And we have worked closely with our labor groups to negotiate agreements and stand by those. So kudos to everyone involved. Next slide. Some examples of what we've done here tied back to those principles. I mentioned the low case rates. We have had no school-based outbreaks. Staff is now into their first and second vaccinations. So we're happy about that. Just as a reminder to our community, along with the second vaccination, there is sometimes that adverse reaction, which bringing on symptoms, and we do need to quarantine for 2 days typically in those situations. So that may mean that a teacher is out and there may be a substitute, or there may be a need to move to asynchronous instruction. But we do look forward to all of our school staffs having that opportunity to be fully vaccinated. COVID testing, I think you know that is in place on our campuses, both asymptomatic testing through our partnership with El Camino Hospital that happens every week, typically on Wednesdays right now, at one of our school sites as a central location. And then we are also doing asymptomatic pool testing for our 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And that has gone very well also. We will be starting that with our junior high schools, I believe, this week. So we look forward to that. We have had 0 positive cases through that pool testing. With regard to our move or our principle around the best instructional model being in person, you have seen recent LASD assessments that Sandra has shared. We do have an equity lens on this, really looking at our youngest learners and our disadvantaged students, understanding that they are really having the most difficult time as measured by our own assessment data. And survey recently, understanding students' mental health is a concern also. And so we are working with our variety of mental health resources to support our students. Around the idea of letting science guide our decisions, California Department of Public Health Guidelines are what we follow now. I think we talked about at the last meeting how Santa Clara County is really deferring to those guidelines now. So those are essentially the law of the land. The biggest change that happened recently was over the weekend. I think many know that over the weekend, California Department of Public Health responded to the change in the Center for Disease Control, the CDC's guidance change for schools, where they changed a number of rules. The most important one that affects us is this idea of 3-foot distancing. 3-foot distancing is now the minimum requirement between students. It still remains 6 feet for adult to adult and adult to student. But in terms of students in a classroom with masks, 3 feet is now the law and the guideline that we are expected to follow. And in terms of collaboration, we do have negotiated MOUs with both of our labor groups. We've worked hard over the months to achieve those and come to agreement, and we're certainly grateful for that partnership. Next slide. So looking at the goal of 5 days per week in person, that's the big question there on the post-it. How do we get there? The board asked staff on March 8th to do some work, and I'll go over that in just a few minutes. Sandra and I will. But that was the direction that we left with on March 8th, and so in part, we are reporting back. Next slide. This is a reminder that this is a piece of it's actually the core principle in our reopening plan that was adopted back in the summer of 2020, about 9 months ago. And this was that we would be, through the course of the school year, be expecting to be operating on a continuum, right? From 100% virtual, which we have had to be in some cases on the far right, to blended, which is where we are right now, to the far left, that when circumstances allow, 100% in person is where we expect to be. Underlying all this, of course, is the requirement that families may also choose to be 100% virtual if that's a choice they make. Next slide. This is just a little recap of where we've been. Again, back in the summer, the board adopted the reopening plan, and we made the decision at that point to reopen in a blended or hybrid format. And that's where we were headed until July, when Santa Clara County landed on what at the time was called the California monitoring list. This was before the colors, but Santa Clara County ended up on that monitoring list, which forced us to start the year 100% virtually. There was a pathway for a waiver to be applied for to reopen TK3. We applied for that waiver and it was granted, and almost simultaneously at the time that waiver was granted, Santa Clara County moved into what is now the red tier. The measurement device changed, but Santa Clara County moved into the red tier, which allowed us to begin our reopening plan in blended or hybrid learning. That was on September 28th that our first set of kids came back in our special day classes. You remember back around the holiday break, we were concerned about safety being compromised due to staffing shortages for a variety of reasons. So we paused for 2 weeks and moved to virtual learning for all of our students, all of our classrooms. And during that time, we rectified that and moved back into the blended format. In mid-January, California Department of Public Health had a guideline change in which they redefined what the meaning of open was. And so we were again forced to pause for our junior high school reopening. Later, a few weeks later, the state allowed for what was essentially a waiver process to reopen junior high schools for certain select school districts. We were one of those. So we started down the path of applying for that waiver. And similar to what happened back in September, shortly thereafter, Santa Clara County moved into the red tier, which did allow our junior high schools to reopen, which brings us up to where we are today, with all of our grade levels now reopen in a blended format. So next slide. So going back to our meeting 2 weeks ago, the board's meeting 2 weeks ago, we were directed to do three things. The first was to ensure we were preparing to return to 5 days in person in the fall for the 2021-22 school year. So we are doing that work right now. We have started. Additionally, the board directed us to explore the return to 5 days in person in the current school year, if we can make that happen. And then thirdly, the board directed administration to collaborate with staff regarding this 5 day per week in-person instruction, both for the current school year if possible and in the fall. During this time, as I mentioned just a moment ago, just this weekend, a couple days ago, new guidelines came out around this 3 foot distancing. Previously, 4 foot was what we were going to have to work with. So our discussions at that point in time were really limited to transitional kindergarten through 3rd grade. I want the board to understand that and that was because of class size. At 4 feet, our upper grade classes generally have larger or more students in them. And so the ability to return to full in-person with 4 foot distancing wasn't possible in an equitable format. But with the 3 foot distancing, that does make that possible. So I think Sandra has the next slide.
So we moved forward with this idea of meeting with our TK3 teachers. We held a town hall meeting last Monday, a week ago, Monday afternoon, to really share some very brief thoughts about returning back to 5 days a week, but really wanting to hear the concerns and questions from our teachers around what was on their mind, how might we partner together, and what will this look like. So we spent some time listening and taking notes and really hearing their concerns, and decided to move forward from there with a small working group. So Ricky Hu and Roberta Pine with LATA put together a teacher survey to really get at what are teacher concerns in addition to our town hall meetings, and teachers volunteered to join our working group. So this past Friday after school, we met for several hours with this group of about 20 teachers. Elena Shea was there representing CSEA as well, to really go into some more depth around teacher concerns and questions they had. And, I listed them here, but as we talked about on Friday, they are not a single piece, can't really be tackled one at a time because so many things are intertwined. And I think a great example of this is the strong want from our teachers for the board to consider a 4-day return as opposed to a 5-day. and they see that as an opportunity to make sure that we provide adequate prep time and collaboration time. We really talk through some different possibilities around there. Of course, we want to, and we have to provide prep time and collaboration time, but there are a wide variety of ways of how to meet those obligations. And we certainly want to make sure that our teachers feel like they have the dedicated time they need to plan, to prepare, to collaborate with their peers and their professional learning community. And so it was a good conversation to really think through what could some of those options look like. Of course, I can hear Roberta in my ears. You know, the difference between collaboration, which we held on Friday, and certain things are absolutely bargainable and need to be negotiated with LATA and potentially CSEA as well. But you can see we talked through a variety of concerns that the teachers have and just questions, and got some really great input and things to consider. A lot of these have been certainly on our radar, and different options were generated, but it was great to hear what resonated more or less with our teachers and staff. And then just this afternoon, so that was Friday. And of course, by the end of the day Friday, we had heard that the CDC had formally made this recommendation. And you know, I would say I was certainly surprised at the turnaround time of the CDE or the CDPH. That's probably the fastest turnaround we've had around, you know, this year of flexibility and pivoting. So when we met with LATA this afternoon in their rep council meeting, which is really a meeting of school representatives, we did talk about how, you know, the changes over the weekend may impact beyond TK3, and that would certainly be a conversation tonight. And again, today, I think it's fair to say, and you might hear tonight, that teachers have opinions on a lot of these different questions and concerns, and their own ideas about the best way to move forward with reopening 5 days a week. Next slide, Marcy. Jeff, you want to take this, or do you want me to? You're muted.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm happy to take it. So the board had also requested to understand what are the steps or what are the pieces that are going to go into a potential move to 5 days a week in person. Certainly, equipment is one thing. We have made a move over the past several years to more flexible furniture, more collaborative furniture. That doesn't always doesn't always turn out to be the most advantageous type of equipment in the classroom during a pandemic. So we have had to order and have ordered single student desks to use in our classrooms. We anticipate those would need to be used this year if we return this spring to full-time in person, and we certainly anticipate that we'll have to use them next year at the very least. So we have ordered equipment for our classrooms. In terms of our facilities, we have spoken to the principals about this need to reorganize certain protocols on site around recess, around lunch, knowing now that that 3-foot distancing is in place between students within a stable cohort, but outside a stable cohort, cohorts still need to stay 6 feet apart, right? And previously that number they had to stay apart was 25 feet. So that's been revised. So there's actually a fair amount of retooling that has to be done by our principals. And as I said, they're involved in that right now. That second bullet there, lunch rotations, yes, those have to be worked out as well with more students on campus. We also really believe that we are going to need to do a new re-enrollment survey for families, what we called before a switch survey. We had 108 families that wanted to make the switch next week. But of course, they didn't know that 5 days a week in person was being considered. So should we go forward with this, we really believe we need to survey families again with the new information and ensure that they understand and are making a decision with all the information. Based on that information, once we get that back, we're going to need to determine what types of staffing changes might be necessary based on that information we get back to us. We'll want to continue both collaboration and in some cases negotiation as well with our labor groups. I think we'll be doing some of both with them. We've done that in the past effectively, and I anticipate we can do that again. And then, you know, with questions and discussion, what we really need moving forward is board direction around return date for the spring and what grade levels do we want to be planning for. Those are going to be important in order for a number of the bullets above to be acted upon. So I anticipate we'll get to that, but it's going to, it's certainly going to be after discussion tonight, and I'm sure there will be plenty of questions to ask and public input as well. Next slide. So with that, that's what I can share with you. Marcy, going back, just want to make sure that there's an understanding here that though some of these things happen, though many of these things happen concurrently, some of them happen consecutively. We need information from the new survey in order to determine what sort of staffing changes might be necessary. And then there are conversations that would take place with staff members. This isn't just send out a piece of paper. That's not the way we work. We're a collaborative organization, so there will be conversations. Principals need to do their planning. Of course, their planning in part is also contingent upon understanding how many students might be on campus. We have already ordered the equipment, but we are waiting for that. It's about a 2 to 4 week wait on that. So I will say I don't see this happening prior to spring break. If the board does, you know, if we do decide upon returning students to campus, I think this will certainly be after spring break. Just to kind of set expectation. You can feel free, of course, to poke at that, but in assessing the work that needs to be done, I don't see it happening prior to that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jeff. Are there any questions from board members regarding the presentation? Jessica?
Yeah, I have a couple of clarifying questions. First one is, you know, we focused a lot upon the distancing because that's the new thing that has changed for us. Are we going to be doing anything else different as it relates to safety?
So I think the most important thing to recognize here is though the distance is shrinking, all of the other mitigation measures, the safety protocols have to remain in place. So everyone on campus wearing a mask, hand hygiene, ventilation is critical. We know masks and ventilation are absolutely critical. So those we will continue to have in place. We'll continue to monitor. Ventilation we monitor on a minute-by-minute basis through monitors in the classroom. And then distancing outside, I think I mentioned the cohorts still have to stay stable, which means not mixing. they can be closer together when outside. Lunchtime, another important one to point out, lunchtime when masks are off and students are eating, the protocols from the state say that 6 foot still needs to be adhered to as much as possible.
All right, another question I have is really about, tell me about what it takes. It's a kind of a two-part question, what it takes to bring TK through 6 back, and also what it takes to bring our junior high students back, possibly 5 days a week.
So can you give a little more definition to what it takes?
What it takes, I think actually in the nuts and bolts, it really seems to focus more on TK through 6, like the details. What are the details of trying to make that happen?
Okay. Yeah, so the nuts and bolts do focus on TK6. Sandra, maybe you can talk a little bit about 7-8.
Yeah, absolutely. When we think of a level of complication, the attempting to bring back 7, 8, 5 days a week is much more complicated. We set up our system in TK6 to be able to flex all of the way, right? We have a virtual school that is separate from our in-person program. We did not set up our junior high school in that way. So if we wanted to look to bring back our junior high school students full-time, 5 days a week, we would have to completely reschedule, and which is a laborious, time-consuming task. But in addition to that, I'm not sure that we have the staffing intact to be able to support both a virtual program and an in-person program without compromising both programs. I don't really know that it's possible. It's something, we've talked about lessons learned and what we want to do differently for next year. This is a big piece about how we want to staff differently for our junior high school program. It will be a big challenge. We just did a full schedule change. They've only been in their new schedule, students, for 2 weeks. And this would require a big overhaul, and then we would be able to understand if it was even possible.
Okay, let me see. I have one or two more questions. Is there, if we can't bring the junior high students back 5 days a week, is there anything more we can add, like to their days that they are on campus, do you think?
Yeah, I don't know if Bhavna wants to speak up to this at all. I think we could attempt to be very creative with the new existing schedule to see how could we extend the time our junior high students are on campus. Right now, they're there 2 days a week until about 12:15 or 12:30 or so. So I would like to look to see, can we extend that to closer to a full day? How might we look at our Wednesdays? This would probably need to be negotiated, the Wednesday piece. But I think there is some flexibility. We could look at extending our days for our junior high students.
Maybe Bhavna doesn't have anything to add. Let me see if I had anything. Oh, there you go.
Sandra shared the complexities of junior high master schedule. I wanted to share that barely 2 weeks from a student standpoint, right? What's best for students. We just made a transformational shift to their schedules in the middle of the year. Most of them have new teachers. Most of them have new teams that they're working in. And then just being on campus feels a lot different, right? So there's definitely that piece. We want to get creative. Currently, the way the junior high schedule is set up is that in the afternoon on their on-campus days, students take an elective and math. Math is virtual currently. And on their at-home days, they take math, elective, PE, and then they check in with their English, history, and science teachers in the afternoon, right? So we've managed to provide 4 days of live instruction, a combination of in-person and virtual. We certainly have started kicking around ideas about how we will get creative and extend the day or creatively look at Wednesday, which of course is negotiable too. But I also want to remind us that we are 2 weeks into this
Total
new
shift.
master schedule for the student. So from a student standpoint, it's a big shift. Even though they were in distance learning before they came, before, in their older schedules, it's still, they established those connections with their classmates, they established those connections with their teachers, and now we have changed it, right? So while we are focusing on redeveloping those connections, reconnecting students, and really bringing together that 16, 17 group of kids together as a classroom community, I want us to remember that from a junior high student's perspective, that's a big change.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Bob.
Thank you. That's all I have for my questions. Thank you.
Any other clarifying questions? Okay, before I take public comment, I just have one little comment, and I guess it's more to you, Jeff, in terms of communicating to our families that whether it's 5 days a week this school year or the next school year, it is not a back to business, right? That we're still in a pandemic, and we do expect families and children to abide by all of the pandemic protocols that we put out. That we can only do 3 feet tests if everyone's wearing a mask, sanitizing their hands, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that in the excitement of people getting back on campus and people feeling pandemic fatigue, I think that we really need to make a point to say
Yep.
that.
Agreed.
Okie doke. Well, then in that case, I'm going to take public comment. We will now take public comment on this agenda item. To comment on this agenda item, members of the public should use the raise hand button if using the Zoom app, or press *9 if using your phone. Your name will be announced when it is your turn to speak. Prior to providing your comment, please be sure your microphone is on. Each speaker will be given, let's do 2 minutes. Okay.
Our first speaker is Ricky Hu.
Hello.
Hi, Ricky.
Great. I'm sure the board, the entire board, Jeff, Sandra, and Randy would agree that teachers have really gone above and beyond to providing the best possible experience for our students this year. I really hope that the board recognizes today that that tremendous effort has not come without cost and without price. There's no doubt that teaching this year with a variety of changes and uncertainty that have come with it have had a profound impact on many of our members' mental health, with fear, anxiety, and exhaustion, and for many of our members, a desire to lead a question about whether they want to remain in this profession. This potential change to elementary school scheduling this spring reflects an additional burden, mentally, emotionally, professionally, for many of our teachers, because there are so many considerations that have to be made in order to make this possible, not just in regards to health and safety, but also programmatic, day-to-day, interpersonal student impacts that will ultimately have the responsibility to navigate and guide our students through. I hope that many of my colleagues today can share these concerns and impacts as well with you. We know that even a lot of these students might be just returning to the classroom for the first time this year. I appreciate Jeff and Sandra's willingness to connect with us and collaborate around the impacts of changes this year, but teachers need time to process these changes and make transitions possible. This is especially true considering that there have been some grade levels that have been brought up tonight for the very first time. And communication and collaboration is key in making this work. And many teachers feel that the past few weeks have shown that it's just simply not allowed for sufficient, authentic collaboration that I know that the board and staff have desired with teachers for the spring. So thank you.
Thank you, Ricky.
Our next speaker is Roberta Pine.
Good evening, board. Thank you for listening to teachers, first of all. Again, I'm a third grade teacher at Oak. I'm the bargaining chair, and I'm a 35-year veteran in Los Altos as a teacher. And I appreciate all the safety protocols in place, the vaccinations that have been underway, and that there is going to be thoughtful planning. And Jeff knows that time is something that teachers need the most of. And so I really want the board to think about the time to allow for students to adjust to this change as well, because it is going to be a huge social emotional change, having had one cohort in my class to blending that with 2 cohorts when we move forward. And we are excited to move forward, to have students back in class. We want you to know that fully. We are always putting our students first. We're looking for their best practices that will help with their social emotional and their instruction, but we want this to be a thoughtful, well planned out, smooth transition. And Sandra mentioned earlier that many teachers are looking to maybe a 4-day blended model to ease us into what next year will definitely be a 5-day model for the fall. But I also want you to take into consideration all the things behind the scenes that parents and board members do not see happening on a daily basis, and to allow things to be well thought out placements of students. When parents make choices, that impacts staffing, that impacts other students that might have to leave a class if it's too large. So listen to the experts, listen to the teachers. Don't rush to just push this back and make this happen faster than is really safely possible and socially, emotionally, and really think hard about the 4-6 and what it's going to take for program changes as well. Special ed, resource, speech and language, PE, all the specials. There's a lot to be thought of. And I really implore you to think through seriously. Thank you so much tonight for your time.
Thank you, Roberta.
Our next speaker is Laurel Mcneil.
Hi, I'm Laurel Mcneil. I am a 6th grade teacher at Oak. Thank you for letting me speak for a moment. I just want to remind everyone how flexible our teachers have been. A year ago, we turned on a dime and did absolutely everything that has been asked of us. We have done it over and over and over again over this last year. We have completely changed everything we do, how we do it, where we do it, when we do it. And like Roberta just said, we want to be back in the classroom. We desperately recognize how important it is to be with our students, but we need to make this change carefully and manageably. All teachers have made extraordinary personal sacrifices. I have my 91-year-old father broke his hip, and my 84-year-old mother broke her sacrum, and I have not been able to visit them due to, all kinds of different things. But I didn't want to be quarantined for 10 days and miss being with my students. And I think teachers have made extraordinary efforts time and time again. And I know it is appreciated, but when we are notified that these changes are going to happen, we are just constantly expected to just change in a moment. And it's assumed that we will do that. And we will, but we feel like ping pong balls and bat it around, and whether this job can't be done without us and the staff and all the support staff. It simply can't be done without us. And so again, I implore you also to really do this methodically and carefully. Don't rush into it. We have been doing a lot of teaching. It's not like we're not teaching. It's not like the students aren't learning. It's just not perfect, but nothing is right now. So we appreciate the support that we do get, but please don't add more and more and more. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurel.
Our next speaker is Natalie Cannon.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Natalie Cannon. I'm a sixth grade teacher at Santa Rita School, and I just wanted to share some thoughts about the coming back for these 5 days. So just a
Did we lose Natalie?
I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay.
Okay, sorry. Hi, I'm Natalie Cannon, sixth grade teacher at Santa Rita. Sorry about that. So just a quick summary of kind of what a day looks like currently with my sixth graders. I have AM, PM cohorts. Students arrive within a 15-minute window because we want to stagger the arrivals on campus. So there's not too many at once. Students hand sanitize on the way in and out of the classroom every time. So lining up before and after recess while maintaining distance. We're also fortunate to get to do the pool testing, which has been, I think a great reassurance for everyone. We really appreciate that. But that does take some of our time. We're reinforcing the distancing both in and outside. And that's on top of the regular classroom protocols a classroom needs, trying to provide instruction with distance awareness. And so all of us teachers, all of us staff, everyone wants the students back in the classroom, but we need to just think about the millions of little tiny details like dropping off and pickup times being staggered so we're not crowding the front of the school, rearranging everyone's lunch and recess, just being really thoughtful and careful and deliberate so that when we do make the transition, it feels smooth, and that's going to help reduce the stress for the teachers, the staff, and the students, and make it really successful, and make it like a positive way to welcome everyone back to a step closer to what we had before. So we just look forward to true collaboration and really being thoughtful and careful about this process. And we do look forward to doing the work, but in a thoughtful and timely way so that it's successful for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Natalie.
Our next speaker is Ziv Attar.
Hello, hi, Ziv Attar here. Do you hear me?
Yes, welcome.
Yeah, hi, thank you. So there's talking about 4 days versus 5 days. And it wasn't clear if it was referring to the opening of this year or next year. And follow up or the same question, regardless if the answer is this year or next year. You mentioned negotiations with the teacher. I honestly don't understand why teachers need another day to prepare if we move to full full in-person 5 days. So in the past, when we had pre-COVID, teachers taught 5 days of school. We moved to the blended system, which either is split during the middle of the day or split between the days. So some of the kids do Monday, Tuesday, the others do Thursday and Friday. And Wednesday was supposed to be a cleaning day, and later it became a day for prepping for the other days. And I can understand that if half the classes at doing online or at home, learning by themselves from the computer, and the other half is at school, then the teachers need to be able to upload material for the half that's not at school. But if everyone is physically in school, in person, same as they were in the last 200 years, why do the teachers still need another day? And why is it something that's being negotiated?
Okay, thank you, Ziv.
Sure.
Our next speaker is Tal Shalon.
Hi, my name is Tal Shalon. I'm the father of 3 children in the Los Altos school district system. And up until now, the discussion has been, is it safe to open the schools? And we did a very thorough job, the board and the teachers. And I think the answer was yes, and amazing success in opening. And now the debate is, what's it going to take to get back to 5 days? And what I've been hearing tonight is, 3 things. The time and resources required on the logistical front to do it, the teacher's concern about rapid transitions, and at least the teacher's point of view that the kids also will need time to adapt. Well, let me start from the back. The kids, my kids, have unfortunately had a very difficult year. And The easiest thing for them is to adapt to a 5-day schedule. That will take all of about 15 minutes. So I don't feel that the kids would do anything other than be joyful that finally the priority of their education is being put at the forefront of what is happening. The schools need to open. The restaurants are open. Workplaces are open. Everything is safe. We've done this in a very thoughtful, managed way. But the only debate should not be about the kids' ability to adapt. They can adapt. The logistics, the resources are available. It's just a matter of will the teachers get on board with the fact that we need to go back to 5 normal days of school. It's a very dangerous precedent to adapt slowly so that the teachers have enough time to control the process. I think the kids' education is the top priority. And once it's safe to do so, which it is now, the only debate should be how quickly can we do it? And we need to salvage the remainder of the school year before we write off the entire year, which is what's happening to my kids. So I just implore you, please open 5 days now, this year, for the rest of the school year. Thank you.
Thank you, Dari.
Our next speaker is Brian Conti.
Hello there. Thank you so much for allowing me the opportunity to speak. I was in 3rd grade at Springer, and I just want to start by saying, you know, as teachers, we fully understand the need for students to be back 5 days a week. I have students in my class that this model just does not work for. And so I fully understand the need for students to be back. And I know that for most students, they will make this transition really quickly. But from a teacher mental health point of view, in order for students to be able to truly learn, the teachers have to be fully present. And we have jumped through hoops since day one. We were the first district ready to go when we shut down. Schools closed on Friday. We were meeting with kids the following Wednesday, and we have been right there from the very beginning. And as teachers, all we want is for our mental health and for our needs to be considered, that we are people and that we have limits, and we have gone so far above and beyond and made sacrifices in all aspects of our lives in order to be there for our kids at 110%. You know, and as far as the workload, I mean, I have maybe 1 day off a week on Saturday, that's it. I spend all day Sunday planning, getting ready, prepping for the week. I spend my evenings grading and giving feedback. We are so beyond exhausted giving the kids the best possible experience we have. And we know that this isn't ideal. We just want our mental health to be considered in this, because in order for students to learn effectively, we have to be able to be present. And if we are burnt out and we are not able to be at our best, we're not going to be able to give students the best possible experience. And that is what we really want to be able to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
That was good.
Our next speaker is Ann Sudd.
Hi, my name is Annie Sood. I have a 2nd grader and kinder. And first I wanted to just say thank you to teachers and board members for unbelievable commitment during this incredibly difficult year. I believe her name was Roberta, the teacher who was not able to help her parents through 2 fractured bones. And I'm so sorry to hear that. And I can certainly empathize with the loss. I think so much of the frustration between students and parents and teachers is actually that we're just going through so much trauma through this year. And it's hard to even verbalize it. And I'm just so thankful for teachers for showing up every single day. And I am just here to say thank you, and also just to advocate for my kids that every day that they're in school, even if it's just 1 day, I understand that teachers, there's an immense amount of planning. I don't even know how teachers have pulled it off this year between the asynchronous and synchronous. It's just, I'm really very impressed at being able to manage the technological burden, the emotional burden, in addition to regular life and pandemic life going on all at the same time. But I will say that for for my children, every single day that they're in school is an incredible blessing. And they really do. There's, you know, even if it's just, honestly, even if it's last week of June, if it's June 1st to June 9th that we are in 5 days a week, it would be impactful to them. So however we can, you know, if there's any way for us to pull this off safely and comfortably, and to address the concerns of teachers, but also, you know, really meet the needs, because families are really struggling. I'm not a teacher. I have no training in this department, and I'm suffering as I'm feeling often as a mom, because I'm trying to do something that I just don't know how to pull off. I'm trying the patience, I'm meditating, I'm trying to do everything that I can, but I fundamentally don't know what I'm doing when I'm trying to teach my kids. And as a result, it's affecting our relationship as a family. And that's also really troubling and disconcerting. So I would just wanted to throw that out there, that kids and families are truly impacted. And if there is, you know, a lot of what appears to be anger is really just struggling. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Annie.
Our next speaker is Brittany Stevens.
Hi, it's actually Brittany's husband going to speak, Darren Stevens. I am a parent of a Springer student and as well as a block student. And I'm also in a unique position, I guess, of being Santa Clara County Department of Public Health employee. So I've seen kind of both sides, and I obviously we love our teachers, and I don't want this, what I'm going to say at all, to sound like any disrespect to teachers, but I do understand your mental health. I also understand that the parents' mental health is also important, and we got to weigh both sides. And I guess my perspective would be, and I love that the board and everyone has considered science and used objective data, but if you're having apprehensions, right, I encourage people to really look at the data, because the schools are a safe place for the kids, and it really needs to be 5 days a week because of how safe it is for the kids. I mean, one of the best epidemiologists, George Rutherford, the other day in our presentation said that he thinks we should have gone back after a week break to kind of settle things out back in spring of last year. So, I mean, that's not that crazy of an idea. And it's just gotten to this point where I think there's a lot of fear defining a lot of these decisions. So I think that it's a really positive thing that we're looking at this. I think that you guys aren't rushing back to it. I don't get the sense you're rushing back to it. I think you've really got a well thought out plan, but I think that the goal of 5 days a week for especially K-6 is got to be the goal, and it's got to be within a month, because I think we're running out of time and parents are going nuts and teachers are going nuts. I understand that, and I can't pretend to know what it's like to be a teacher, but I do think that kids 5 days a week seems to me like it actually might be easier in the long run, because you only have to plan for one thing, kids in class, and everything you do is all the same every day, then, which might seem like it might be a little easier. So just my 2 cents. Thanks.
Thank you, Darren.
Our next speaker is Carrie Middleton.
2 minutes goes fast. Jesus, I can't talk.
Hello?
Carrie?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Hi, my name is Carrie Middleton, and I am a 3rd grade teacher at Santa Rita. I am also a parent of a 5th grader and a 3rd grader at Santa Rita as well. I just want to say thank you for taking our consideration. I was also part of the Friday meeting for teachers to come back, and I want to make it explicitly clear, teachers want kids back full-time. I have sacrificed more family time than you know on weekends and evenings, prepping and getting ready. And trust me, teachers are very excited for 5 days to have one job again, finally, and to only actually prep and plan for one classroom. However, I have not heard any teachers complain about the risks of COVID. I think we're all feeling really grateful that vaccines are here. But what we are asking for is just that thoughtful time to ensure that transition is best for us, as well as students. I just think that there's a lot that goes into setting up and resetting up classrooms that parents don't recognize, the little minute details that happen. We're switching kids around, we're moving furniture, we are adjusting a lot of pieces, how kids move about, how we set up our materials. It's just a lot more. And I think that what we're asking for is that time, a month, whatever, to be thoughtful about how we're bringing kids back safely, ensuring protocols are in place, and making sure it's a good fit for everyone. And just really want people to understand teachers love our students and we do want them back. We just want to make sure we do it the best that we can, because that's just what we do. We do it the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie.
Our next speaker is Amy Wang.
Hi. Good evening. Hi. I just want to first say thank you to the administration, to the board, as well as the teachers for everything that you've done this year. It's been incredibly challenging, as so many of you have mentioned, as well as parents. I wanted to mainly ditto the other parent, Ann Sud, I believe, who shared very kindly her concerns, but also advocated for teachers. And I really just wanted to speak up for one. Of course, I want to advocate for my kids. I have a 3rd grader and a 6th grader at Oak, and they have both suffered in different ways. And as much as Mondays and Tuesdays are great for my 3rd grader, his engagement drops, just progressively from Wednesday through Friday. But I also want to advocate for our teachers. For optimal learning, and you guys already know this, for optimal learning to happen, it's a two-way street that has to occur in the classroom. And that means the teacher being present and the students being present. So I am in support of you taking a thoughtful approach to opening more days. Honestly, for our family, it's been tough too, and it's been tough for many families, and I understand many of the parents' concerns, but we would be so grateful if you added and made it 4 days, and let the teachers have Wednesdays so that they can plan as they've been planning, and have that mental health day, right? So many corporate companies have given their employees, random days off for mental health during this past year. I know my husband's had that, and he's very lucky. And our teachers don't have that. I know that my kids' teachers, both my kids' teachers, are working a lot, and they're working on the weekends. They barely get Sunday off. So I fully support having a very thoughtful transition for everybody. We are a collective for our community. The LASD community, we have to come together to get through this and work together and support one another. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
Our next speaker is Tomar Sharon.
Yeah, thank you. And apologies for earlier and misunderstanding the protocol.
No worries.
I just wanted to start by saying thanking all the teachers and the administration. I think I'm very happy to hear that everybody supports going back to 5 full days a week. If there's some opportunity at some point in the board meeting, I don't know if this is possible, but we heard a lot about the teacher mental health and the challenges. I was under the impression that going back to kind of the way of doing things for many years would be easier for everybody. And now that the science is there and everybody feels safe about COVID for all the research and the vaccines that are out there, and we have that opportunity, right, for both the parents and the teachers to do what's been proven to be good and what everybody likes. If somebody could explain some of those concern and why we wouldn't just go back to 5 days a week, I would appreciate that. Thanks.
Thank you, Tomer.
Our next speaker is Emily Simon.
Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Simon, and I'm a 4th grade teacher at Almond. I wanted to start by saying how absolutely excited I am at the prospect of coming back 4 or even 5 days a week. I mean, it's something that I didn't think was going to be possible during this school year, and just getting to even to start to discuss it is thrilling. Like, the amount that I want to throw, like disable my Google Classroom and just have the kids, that's just it's really thrilling. I've also, I mean, as many teachers have talked about, there's also a huge list of needs that comes along with this. A lot of it is, you know, and with regards to prep time and figuring out logistics with recess and arrival and departure and classroom design and all these other things that have already been brought up. I don't want to reiterate. I just really want to second, you know, what Ricky, who brought up at the beginning, and everyone about really the time required in making these plans and getting our classrooms in order. I mean, for myself, I have still lingering questions like, how about, well, teachers and portables who have 30 students? Is it really realistic to have students 3 feet apart? Does that mean pulling other furniture out of our classrooms and getting rid of classroom libraries to make space for them? I have concerns regarding, you know, spring break travel. Since the 10-day quarantine has lifted, my students have already started talking to me about all the crazy places they're going during spring break. And there are 100 more questions that teachers have. And having made the transition from virtual into hybrid, I think there were these unseen hours of meetings and being on campus on weekends and a seemingly never-ending parking lot of questions between predominantly staff and the principal about just creating the logistics about it. And even just things like moving furniture. I mean, I asked my parents to come in on the weekends with me and help me move furniture because I can't do it by myself. And so I really just want to second that, you know, I'm so excited to come back, but really this understanding of all the amount of planning that's needing to go into that and having the time for each school site to make all those plans so that we can go back stress-free and not be piling onto the mental health of teachers and students.
Thank you, Emily. Marcy, before you call the next person, I'm just going to ask if anyone else wants to say anything. Raise your hand now. I'm going to cut it off. All right, thank you.
Our next speaker is Kiwi Capriles.
Hello. My name is Kiwi Capriles, and I am a first grade virtual teacher. I'm housed at Springer School where I taught last year. And I would like to present my observations based on teaching daily from the school, though being a virtual teacher. I taught last year partnered with a current first grade teacher who plays basketball and runs, and she has the energy of literally an Energizer bunny. And I get the opportunity to check in with her and see how she's doing. And I do want to share that with the heightened vigilance of taking 23 or 24 first graders and making sure they're distancing, they're staying distance, they're hand washing, they're keeping their masks on, to keep her cohorts separated, which means more duty, less free time, less time to go to the bathroom or even eat lunch. It's a different time right now. I see her and I'm blown away by how tired someone who just a year ago was so energetic and exuberant. She does not have a full class right now. She has a half a class at a time. And yet it's exhausting trying to keep those enthusiastic, wonderful kids apart. Masked, hand washing, just hand washing with a group of kids is a miracle in of itself. And I think about, we as teachers want a birthday party, a special time school to be, and it is exhausting. And I currently have Wednesdays off because I'm virtual, but everyone does. I don't know how I would make it without having Wednesdays off. I just want to share that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kiwi. Marcy, Mary Hamilton will be our last speaker.
Our next speaker is Tal Shalon.
Hi, my name is Tal Shalon, and I also have 3 kids in the Los Altos district. Actually, I had 4, but I took 1 out, and some parents created a pod with an LASD teacher who's been teaching the pod of 10 kids for the whole year, which was really great for everyone. So I'm hearing a lot of concerns for the teacher, but it's not like something that was not done. I see in Menlo Park, in other schools in the area, all private schools are being 5 days a week in-person learning. Everything is safe and kids and teachers are happy. So all those concerns can be answered. And I don't think any of those concerns will not be raised next year. So I don't know why we should wait for next year to deal with all the problems. We should do anything we can to open the schools now and answer all the concerns and start getting the kids back to their routine and to safe environment of education. Thank you.
Thank you, Tal.
Our next speaker is Chris Middleton.
Hi, everyone. I'm still hearing the other speaker. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Chris.
So I wanted to kind of build off what my husband, Brian Conti, mentioned earlier. We're in a unique position of being two teachers in Los Altos. And I can speak to kind of the stress of this year for the teachers and the amount of work that we've already done. And I think what I'm more concerned about with transitioning yet again is that there has been a lot of stress that's come with this year. And right now, even with Wednesday, I am typically working most of Sunday. So that's about 2 full days to prep for everything. And I don't see that going down just because we're in 5 days a week. And the reason for that is because I'm still going to have every moment planned, because I'm going to have to consider how long it's going to take to transition, the hand washing or sanitizing, all of the specials classes that are currently online for 6th grade, which some will come back in person and some will not. So does that mean then I'm planning in for kids to dial into meets when we're in person together? And so I do worry that kind of rushing to go back to this is going to create a lot more stress and work, even though in theory, it is going to eventually be very nice and organized and all worked out. I don't know that starting this process in a month is going to be the best for me or for my students, and definitely not for my family. So I wanted to put that out there, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Chris. I'm going to close public comment. If you have anything else to say, please email us at trustees@lasdschools.org. Okay. Board members, would any of you like to provide comment on this agenda item? Jessica?
Just some questions that came out of some of the comments, because I wanted to get some answers on them. So one of Roberta had asked about, like, will there be a situation where, say, our blended kids, where they will have to end up being pushed out of a classroom because kids are coming back from virtual?
So that is one of those questions that we don't know the answer to until we get the data, right? Until we find out how many people, because we anticipate some people may want to return to virtual because the number is, there's more students in a class, because I know we have some families concerned about that, but we have more families that will probably move the other way, right? The other direction. So it's a question we really can't answer without knowing the data.
Can I just add maybe more generally, Jeff, that I would say, looking at our current numbers, I would expect few already in-person students requiring a teacher change, but the impact from the move from virtual into blended is really the unknown, right? Even if a family would choose to remain in virtual, their parts of their grade level, so many might return that they would require a new teacher in virtual, even though they're remaining in virtual, because we need to move a staff to an in-person section somewhere. I don't know if that just level of detail is helpful for you or for families.
That's useful for me. Another question actually from our last speaker is, and it kind of came up with all of our teachers, how are we working out the specials, or do you have an idea now of how we're going to be working out the specials if we go 4 or 5 days a week?
I will let Sandra respond to that one.
Well, you know, we have built several special schedules this year. Nobody likes a new schedule. So I would anticipate that we will be able to provide in-person physical education. We've already met with our PE team at our elementary schools and with Monica, our nurse, to really talk through what that could look like as our teachers work at one or more schools, but maintain their distance. So PE, I can really foresee that we are able to offer in-person PE. The biggest challenge that we will need to work through is around our 4-6 music program. Because right now the public health guidelines are very solid around music and difficulties with in-person music when it comes to instruments other than perhaps strings. But our classrooms are not set up. All the violinists at a school are not in the same 5th grade cohort, right? It doesn't happen that way. So I don't know what our music program will look like for families in 4, 5, 6 who choose to return to in-person. It might be something for the last part of the school year that is given up. We can certainly continue to offer music for our virtual families, and we will be creative and brainstorm as much as we can what that experience could look like for families who do choose to return in person. But we have challenges of cohorts and challenges of just the public health guidelines around music.
Awesome.
And then we talked about, our computer science program will continue to be a virtual program. So yes, to Chris's point, we will have a schedule where our 6th graders in C-STEM log in and have their computer science experience. And, our living classroom and our docent programs have both adapted so much, and we need to figure out exactly what that looks like.
Awesome. And my last question for now is more about making sure the teachers do have the time for collaboration. So if we were to go 5 days a week, how do you think we could bend to make sure they are getting that time?
Yes, this is something we certainly need to get down to the minute by minute detail, but I could see something like a minimum day on a Wednesday that provides that collaboration time. Pre-pandemic, we had an early release Thursday that everybody in the community was used to. So I could envision an early release or a minimum day. In addition, because typically our prep times for our teachers are provided by our special staff. So our music staff, our PE staff. So because we don't have all of those happening or to the degree with which they normally happen, we might need to look at a slightly shorter Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, to be sure that teachers have adequate time. And I will, I told the teachers on Friday, I don't want to give them their minimum required time. I do understand that we are asking so much of our teachers, and I want to be able to give them adequate time so they feel prepared, not only in their planning, but also in time to collaborate with their peers.
That's all I have for now. Thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. Any other board comments? Okay, well, I'll go ahead and start. Well, first I want to start by thanking our teachers and our staff for all of the hard work that they've done in pivoting many times over the last 12 months. I know this has been a hard year for you. It's been a hard year for so many of us for so many different reasons. I was reflecting as Jeff was giving his presentation a year ago when we shut down our schools, and less than a week later, our teachers were up and running, right, and doing their virtual classroom. I don't want to give them less than a week to do this, right? That's really not fair. But I also was looking at Jeff's slide, the nuts and bolts slide, Jeff, with all the different pieces that need to be in place. And I'm just wondering, like a month from now, just thinking would be the Monday after spring break. I don't know what day that is, the 19th or something. I don't know. I'm wondering if that would give you enough time, if that would be at least for TK through 6, because I'd like to segment, for me anyway, I'd like to segment 7th and 8th grade out and handle that separately.
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. I think that's, I mean, it's a full month from today, 4 weeks from today. We know there's a lot to work through, but I do believe that with continued collaboration and negotiations, we can hammer out all of the things that need to be done in that time. I think we're going to absolutely need to have some time for teachers to return to classrooms and prepare, right? For those that aren't in classrooms yet, and for those that are currently in person, they're going to need to do some reset for additional students in their classes. And it's not just more desks, right? There's a lot of a reset that has to be done to prepare for that, right? So we're definitely going to need, I think, to provide some days for teachers to accomplish that, where the kids may be working asynchronously. That's just to me just a given.
Yeah,
but the 19th, I think 4 weeks out does give us adequate time. I mean, Sandra, you're going to be involved with a lot of the scheduling aspects of it and so forth. Your thoughts would be appreciated also.
Yeah, I think the 4 weeks time allows us, the biggest turnaround that we need to get is in partnership with our parents to get those switch requests survey information back as quickly as possible, because that's really on the scheduling end and the staffing end, much of the work that needs to be done. And I know that in and of itself induces a little stress among our teaching staff, anticipating possible changes. So the sooner we can have that information, I think the better. Everybody can really then thoughtfully plan and feel like it's not just a rushed process to get students back. And in the meantime, I know our principals have already begun doing some thinking and planning around the logistics of bringing students back 5 days a week and what that could look like. So I believe, yeah, 4 weeks time sounds like a good enough time to make it happen.
And I'll add to Shali, to the
Sure.
question. We are conscious of the fact that we don't want to turn spring break into a work week, right?
Yep.
That is going to be a much needed week for our teachers and staff. So we certainly don't want to turn that into a week of expected work, because that's not what we have in mind.
I just want to amplify one thing. Sorry, Jessica, let me just close my thought. Something that Sandra said, and it's something that we've been saying since this pandemic. It's going to take all of us working together, and our parents are going to have to give our teachers a little grace if they need a few days to teach asynchronous to get their classrooms ready so that our kids can be back. That's going to be really important, as well as making sure that they're diligent about the symptom checks and all of that. So yeah, and to your point, Sandra, to return that survey back as soon as possible so that we can make the decisions we need to make in a very timely manner.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Sorry, Jessica, go ahead.
It was just kind of piggybacking off the 2 asynchronous day thought. Your thought is that would be the 2 days before spring break?
You're muted, Jeff.
Sorry about that. Yes. And I don't have a number yet, right? Yeah. But yes, some time prior to spring break to ensure they can be set, ready to go, kind of mentally gotten heads around it, and then be able to step away for spring break.
And then building off of what Shally said is, and she said it prior to all this, is that the only thing that really has changed here is the 3-foot distance, and everything else is in place. Our whole community commitment to healthy schools is still in place. So we all have to be following that as parents, teachers, staff, just pretty much anybody related to LASD has to be following that in order for us to do this and to do this successfully. And so it does mean that you do need to think seriously about your traveling, and just be careful during spring break. We cannot 100% let our guard down yet. We don't have enough information to know that it's okay to do that. So I am in support of us coming back TK through 6, 5 days a week. I think it's a good idea to do a minimum day on Wednesday, and possibly shorter days the other days of the week. I want to make sure that our teachers have the time. So I support that. Also, I do think we have to, as Shally said, also talk about 7th and 8th separately. It's kind of why I asked the questions in the first place. I think it's a different beast, and you pretty much explained how it's a different beast. So that's where I'm on at TK through 6. And we can discuss 7th and 8th after.
Thanks, Jessica. Brian, you had, sorry, Vladimir, Brian had his hand up before.
Thanks. I think I'm generally in agreement with what's been discussed. One of the questions I wanted to ask was about whether there'd been discussion about staggering the return. When we came back in the fall, we sort of did it a couple of grades at a time in order for everybody to get used to, you know, the new routine and stress test in a more limited way, the accommodations. So as people pointed out, time's a little short, but I don't know if there's been discussion about that. I mean, I could see a lot of different things. I do believe that, you know, everybody at bottom has, you know, the same best interests of both our students and our families and our teachers in mind. So I believe that everybody will work together to try to make something that works for everybody. I definitely take the mental health concerns that have been expressed by our teachers extremely seriously. I would expect that as we do this, you know, I believe that the administrators involved will minimize changes for students and for teachers as much as humanly possible. And so although I would like to see obviously return on the 19th, I do wonder whether of everybody, I wonder whether it would make more sense and reassure some of the staff to either to phase it in, do it later in the week. I mean, I don't know if there have been thoughts about that or if you've got opinions.
So it's certainly something that's come up in discussions, you know, in thinking. Might we want to phase? It's what we did in the fall. I don't think it's necessary because I believe we have those practices in place by and large. We've demonstrated we're doing them effectively on campuses. That being said, I'm certainly not going to stand in the way of it either, because I think the most important thing here is getting our students back on campus, right? And in a thoughtful and kind of attentive way.
That makes sense. I mean, I think looking at the calendar, right, it sort of seems to me like April 26th is kind of the last day when we can reasonably make a big shift like this, just in terms of the number of weeks left in the school year. But in the same way that, you know, I'm more than willing to take our teachers and administrators' opinion on whether a short Wednesday makes sense, or, you know, sort of what makes the most sense in terms of breaking their prep periods up over the course of a week. I'm personally willing to, you know, take feedback from the teachers in terms of if they need 2 or 3 days to reset their classroom, whether it makes more sense for those to be the last 2 days before spring break or the first 2 days after spring break when they'll feel more refreshed. I'm willing to sort of take that input and see the schedule flex to that amount. I also want to say, I take Ricky's point about, you know, these changes coming, right? It's something we've been struggling with since the very beginning of the year, that education was the one sector that was given no defined path back to normalcy, right? Every other sector said, well, when you're purple, you've got these rules, and red, these rules, and orange, these rules, and yellow, these rules. And for education, it was always just, nope, here are the rules. And we'd say, well, what will the next set of rules be? And we could never get an answer. So we've always, unfortunately, had to react to this kind of thing. And I fully understand how hard that's been on our teachers, our families, everybody. And I've lost my train of thought. Oh, I know what it was. One of the pieces of that was the question about money, right? And so there were a lot of things that we couldn't plan for a year ago because we didn't know if the economy would fall apart. We didn't know if the state would help. We didn't know if the federal funding would help. Thankfully, both the state and the federal government have passed bills which include a lot of money. So I would certainly hope that, you know, we do everything that we can in terms of whether it's subs, whether it's moving people. I mean, our teachers should not have to bring their parents in to rearrange their classrooms. Like, they should, I would hope, put their hand up to their principal and we can get somebody in to move furniture around. So, you know, please, teachers, know that we want you to have all the resources you need, both on a daily basis and as part of this transition. And I would, you know, and we should have those resources available. So if we're not offering you the right thing, it's probably because we don't know exactly what you need. So please ask.
Thanks, Brian. Vladimir?
In a previous life, I had a very small experience teaching. It was at the college level, not at elementary school level. And it was nowhere near the sophistication that our teachers use. So I have some appreciation for the amount of prep time it takes to prepare for a particular class. And I'd like to remind the parents who don't necessarily understand the amount of prep time that's needed, that as a district, one of the things that we try to do is differentiated instruction. Well, that's gone out the window, right? We can't go up to, a teacher can't go up to a child and offer that particular child some help. There are no small groups that we can have with our teachers, with our students. So the fundamental way that we are going to have to teach is going to be different. And so that means that you have to rethink of practically everything that you do in the classroom. And that's a huge ask. That's a huge lift. And I appreciate that. I do have two questions, or one question about two different groups, special ed and English language learners. My biggest concern actually is the special ed. How are they going to fit into the rest of the schedule changes that we have in there? And also for English language learners, simply because they don't have the ability to understand what's going on. And so for them, I would expect them to be completely lost in the changes that are occurring and so on and so forth. And so perhaps you could say, Jeff or Sandra, or actually probably just Sandra, right? A little bit, a couple of words. Jeff, I'm kidding. A couple of words about special ed and English language learners.
I'm happy to, and Jeff, feel free to chime in. When we think about our students in special education, they are, as a group, probably our most broad group in terms of needs. So I can certainly say that I know our special ed department has responded just as phenomenally as our general education teachers and staff had to really flex as we have had to flex by creating new schedules, to switching the types of services or the amount of services based on need. But I know fundamentally, the more we can have students in person in class, the higher kind of the successful outcomes for our students with greatest need. Inclusion is a challenge, and I don't know specifically, Vladimir, if that's what you were also referring to, but we need to be mindful about ways that we can include our students who are not always in our general education classrooms to make sure that they are having those learning and social opportunities with their peers. Do you want to add anything to that, Jeff? And then I can talk about EL students.
No, I think that's, I think that covers it. I do know, as Sandra said, much like our regular education teachers, our special education teachers are superior. And Jennifer Kiker, our special education director, who I know you know, has worked with our special ed teachers and staff and really created an exemplary situation through this first part of the school year. And I have no doubt that will be replicated, but it takes a great deal of work and effort, and as was described earlier by some of our teachers, a great deal of change is involved too. But the end goal is still the same.
And just to add, our students who are learning English, of all of our subgroups, I think they will benefit so tremendously by being in person with their peers. You know, it's been tough for everybody to be isolated in a pandemic or part-time in a classroom and then at home, but our students who are learning English really rely on that social opportunity on the playground, in the classroom, through walking to school or driving to school, and the whole experience is what helps build their English proficiency. So getting them back into the classroom and continuing their services. We've been serving our students all along through the pandemic, either virtually or in person. And so those services will continue, those specialized services for our beginners, but getting them in the classroom 5 days a week should really help their English proficiency dramatically.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Sandra. It seems to me, listening to teachers and to parents, and taking into consideration of the kids in mind, that we need to orient ourselves towards 5 days a week. But if there is, if there are real difficulties in 5 days a week, I would hope that you and Sandra would work with teachers to make sure that that amount of time is kept to a minimum. I don't have any preconceived notion that I want 5 days or 4 days is okay. You know, Jeff, I expect your professional judgment will be the right thing to do. So I'm supportive of whatever you and the teachers and parents come up with as the right number to look for.
Thanks, Vladimir. Steve?
Sitting here quietly listening to everybody. So far, no one said anything that I violently disagree with. I think we want to make sure that everyone realizes that we wrongly realize is that our teachers have been extremely flexible, extremely hardworking, extremely working out of their way to make sure this has been a successful year in the most odd way of delivering education. I do agree that getting kids back into a classroom, we're talking TK6 at this point, 5 days a week makes a lot of sense to me, although that flexibility, as Vladimir indicated, as Brian's hinted at, I'm leaving that up to you guys to talk through what the details of that are that make sense. But the more time I can get kids on campuses, I think the better off they'll be, and helps us plan better for the fall. I really need to make this work well so we understand when we open up in August that we are comfortable and confident that we will be able to move forward in a very streamlined way. It's not reinventing the wheel. It's we understand what we're going to do and what we're going to be doing. I think with families, that we had a couple of parents speak about, open it tomorrow type of an approach. And all the jobs I've ever had, I can easily do those from my office, from my home. I can really do those over a screen like we're doing now. Teaching is not one of those jobs that does that transition that easily, that quickly. And I think all the points you guys have made about what it takes to shift from different modes of education delivery, families need to hear. And that's what we're going through, a very thoughtful process about opening back up. We're not rushing out the door. I think one of the things that I've been proudest about as I talk to people about what you've all accomplished here, it's always been a very thoughtful movement of what do we open up so we're not risking anybody or putting anybody at risk. And we have embraced from early on that idea of the continuum, that there's flexibility up and down that food chain of how we're gonna make this work. And I think that's paying off at this stage as we're trying to the next level of that continuum, which is to open up full time, 100%. So I can only say that I'm on board with where you're headed. I think there's a lot of nuanced details that as a non-teacher, I'm gonna leave you guys to work the details on. I think the direction's the right one for what we need to be doing as a district. So please, you have my support in moving forward. And I think the cases you made for the timing you're looking at makes perfect sense to me. So
I think then what I'm hearing then is that Jeff, I can give you and staff the board can give you and staff direction to move forward with opening TK through 6 5 days a week in person. It sounds to me from the comments that I've heard and from how you've explained it, a month seems like it should be about the right amount of time to get all the moving parts into place. And I would just ask that you please continue working with the teachers to achieve that goal. Any other comment?
Could I just add a nuance, at least from my point of view? I think 5 days a week should be the goal. But if it turns out that there are good reasons that we can't do that, we have to do 4.5 days, or we have to shorten it Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, or some variation of that, I'm totally okay with that. But I do support the goal of 5 days a week. I think that everybody has said, everybody agrees that in-person education is better than any other alternative that we have. That's what I'm supporting.
So that's from one board member. I think it would be most helpful for us to have clear direction from the board as a unit.
Jessica?
I'll just go back. I pretty much had said it. I am for TK through 6 opening a month from now. I like the idea of at least having a minimum day on Wednesday to give extra prep time and shorter days if you so need it for the other days, not as short as the minimum day, but give them the extra time for TK through 6. And I think a month from now is a good idea. I think sounds like you're well on your way on planning. And yes, there's some work to do, but I know how much you guys can get done in a week, let alone 3 weeks before spring break. So And I'm thank you in advance for all that.
I think
Brian?
I second all of that. And we understand also that I indicated earlier, I'm willing to be a little bit flexible with some of the details. And I think particularly because, as we've heard, this has been hard on everybody, but it's hard on different teachers sort of differently. And so I also want to sort of call out in our direction, right? This notion that if there are teachers that have to go from virtual to in person for the first time this year, that's going to be an extraordinarily heavy lift. And, I certainly hope that we'll be able to give them, a significant amount of extra time, extra support, minimize obviously the lift for as many teachers as we can, but to the extent that there are teachers who have to make that kind of lift, whether that's their classes starting later, whether it's them getting, days of sub time, whatever, I'm sure you guys will help work that out on a case-by-case basis as teachers need.
Okay.
Yeah, Jeff, I trust you and staff to make that transition easier for the teachers.
Okay.
So, Steve, you unmuted. Did you want to say something?
No, Jeff said he wanted to hear from all five of us. So I'm
Oh.
back to what that was being said earlier, which was, the goal is 5 days. I know there's prep time that has to be bought into that, where you schedule, how you schedule, what makes sense for you guys to schedule it around, obviously has to be woven into that schedule. To your point, Thursdays used to be our shorter day for prep time. That makes sense to me that it's now Wednesdays, because most of us have gotten used to the idea of Wednesday being a disconnect day anyway. So yeah, where you're headed makes perfect sense from my point of view. And just looking at the details, I know you're gonna have to work out.
Okay, thank you.
Basis, but in general, it's gonna have to be worked out.
And Shelley?
Yeah, so my direction to you would be TK through 6, 5 days a week, in a month from now. I'm not in favor of 4 days a week. I'd rather you shorten the other days just so kids can be on campus 5 days a week. I think that's going to be really important for them. Just from what I've been hearing in emails and just, we've heard from teachers, we've heard from parents, and obviously we're not going to hear from students, but that's the third group, right? And I don't expect a first grader to call in and say anything, but, a lot of our kids are feeling disengaged, or a lot of them there's mental health effects that they don't have the words to verbalize. And I think we kind of have to keep that in mind too, to think about how we can advocate for the kids, especially our youngest ones who can't really verbalize that themselves. So that would be my preference.
Okay, thank you.
Brian?
Are we gonna do a round for 7 and 8 as well? Direction?
Jeff, are you looking for direction
Yes.
for
Oh,
7 and 8?
that's what I was expecting, yes.
Okay. Okay, does anyone want to start?
I can start.
Okay.
So 7 and 8 is sort of tough. I mean, looking back at Jeff's timeline, we were originally hoping to return for 7th and 8th, I think in December, and then we got overcome by events, and then we got kneecapped by the state at the last minute in January. Unfortunately, I think, I hate to use the word stuck, but and for full disclosure, I have an 8th grader, so I've gotten a little bit more of a close-up look at the schedule change. But for all the parents out there who sort of don't understand how hard it is to put together a master schedule for junior high, even in like a normal July, it's been even harder this year. And so it really does seem like disruption too far at this point to try to make all the kids and teachers, throw all the matchsticks up in the air and then pick them up again with just sort of 5 weeks left in the term, unfortunately. What I would like to see is full days back on campus for the cohort days. Currently, for those of you who don't have junior high students, the junior high students who are back in blended are back for 2 mornings a week, and then go back for asynchronous for a whole variety of reasons. But I would love for us to be able to provide supervision and space so the kids who want to stay on campus can have lunch on campus and then maybe do their afternoon. I mean, if we could get a way for them to have more in-person instruction, that would be great. But at a minimum, I would love to see them have space so that they can do their afternoon virtual classes, you know, on the lawn, in the gym, somewhere where they can still kind of be around their peers and have that experience without putting a huge extra burden on sort of the teachers to try to get used to a whole new set of 100 students on short notice. And then anything beyond that, I think obviously would be great. At junior high, it's a socially awkward time. At the best of times, I'm sure we have a lot of students who are struggling for the lack of interaction. So any ways that we can think outside the box in order to provide some more of those opportunities, whether it's Wednesdays or whatever, I think would be great. And then I think at some point we should also talk about end of year graduation stuff. Because I hope that we actually could do an in-person graduation and give the kids at least something of a send off from the Egan and Block campuses rather than having to do it virtual again, but that's probably a discussion for another time.
Thanks, Brian. Steve?
Yeah, I'm going back to what the dialogue between Jessica and Sandra was earlier about the focus and how to deal with 7th, 8th grade moving forward. The idea of the extending the day made sense to me. It'd be great if we can figure out how to do that in a meaningful way. The Wednesday picking up would be nice, but I understand that's maybe a lift. But yeah, that dialogue, and if we go back and listen to what you framed up, Sandra, at that time, to me actually looked like we were moving forward, and that made me feel was back to Brian's point, since we just got these people on campus, we just got that launched, and to reset it all makes little sense to me. So this idea of at least trying to extend what we've already put in place and make it a meaningful extension out of it would be good.
Thanks, Steve. Jessica or Vladimir?
No, I pretty much am echoing Brian and Steve. The reason I asked the question is I just wanted to know really what the depth and difficulty is for junior high. And I do think it's too much and not as much reward for our students. They just had this huge transition in these last 2 weeks. To blow up the schedule again would not be great for their mental health, nor their teachers' mental health. And that's, both are very, very important. Yes, I would like to see a longer day. And I echo Brian on the graduation, having an 8th grader myself, but that's another day.
Thanks, Jessica. Vladimir?
I'm comfortable with focusing on getting as much on-campus time as possible for 7th and 8th and just leaving it at that. I think that forcing the issue and doing a schedule change is probably way too far. So I'm just comfortable with trying to get the kids back on campus as much as possible, whatever you think is the right thing to do. And in addition to graduation, we have this, are we doing Special Olympics this year? No?
Junior Olympics?
We are not able to do that now.
Oh,
darn.
All right, well, next year.
Thanks, Vladimir. I agree with my fellow board members. Within the current schedule, if we can find a way to get the kids on campus for longer, that would be my preference as well. Is that enough direction for you, Jeff? Does that give you enough to work with?
Yep, that makes
Yeah,
sense.
Sandra?
And we can work with that. Yep, thank you.
Great. Are there any last comments before we move on from this agenda item? Okay, seeing none, let's move on to the next item. Equity Task Force update. Staff will provide an update on the progress of the Equity Task Force. The Board of Trustees will consider approval of the Teaching Tolerance Anti-Bias Framework as a guiding document for the teaching of equity, diversion, inclusion, anti-bias, and social justice. Mr. Baer.
Yes, I just want to take a moment to say a few words ahead of this. The next two board items, this one included, aren't necessarily intentionally linked, but they are certainly they certainly have to do with one another. After the Equity Task Force update, you're going to be considering a resolution denouncing hate crimes against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. The tragedy that happened in Atlanta and the continuing violence and hatred that's been exhibited is really something we need to take on. Our task force, that's part of that charge, is making sure that our students are equipped to think for themselves and understand how to respond, and helping them frame their thinking as they go through Los Altos School District. So the recent events have just really highlighted the need for this work that's going on. I want to thank Greg Drummond, coordinator in the Curriculum Instruction Office, who's spearheading this, and part of our leadership team, Bob Narula, principal at Block, who you heard earlier, is also on that leadership team, along with Sarah Gerlinger, who I don't think is here tonight. Greg, is that right?
Not here tonight, no.
Not here tonight, but is also a really a key contributor from our as a teacher in the district, and a passionate participant and leader. So with that, I'm going to introduce Greg Drummond to give us an update.
Thanks, Jeff. It's great to be able to be here tonight to report on some progress that we've made with the Equity Task Force. Since we saw you several months ago and kind of talked about how we envisioned the work to go, we've had many meetings with the task force and have arrived kind of at the end of our first cycle, and have been able to provide Jeff with some recommendations for some next steps in LASD's implementation of the equity policy. And our hope tonight is Bhavna and I would like to just fill you in on the work that we've done, and give you some context around the recommendations that the task force has provided Jeff with. Marcy, do you want to go to the next slide? So I'm going to start kind of right where we left off the last time I spoke with you, and just remind you of a couple of things about the task force. We put out notifications to the community, both to staff and to families, that we were forming this task force, and asked for interested parties to let us know they were interested. We had around 50 folks respond with interest, and it was really quite a showing. People talked about why the work was important to them, why they wanted to be part of the task force, how they felt like they could contribute, and who they were really interested in representing on the task force. We narrowed the list down to 7, including myself and Bhavna and Sarah, 7 staff members, 7 parents, Shali's on the task force representing the board. And then we wanted to find a way to include all of the voices of people who said they wanted to participate. And so we formed a group called the Think Tank, and that group is, we're making an effort every time we go through one topic of the equity policy to do something to get the voice of the people who wanted to be a part of the work in some way. So in this first round, we offered some open-ended question for them to talk to us about curriculum and instructional materials, which you'll learn here shortly was our first area of focus. We've had monthly meetings, and have also Sarah and Bhavna and/or myself have interviewed almost every member of the task force at this point to really learn about their priorities, where they see the biggest need for for improvement in LASD so that we can provide Jeff with those recommendations. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Marcy. So just a reminder here that a delineation is important, that the equity task force is really not doing the work of implementation, but the role of the task force is to provide feedback about the implementation. And so you'll hear me talking in that way. Bhavna and Sarah and I are in an interesting place in this because, well, as are most of all of our staff members, where we are really doing work on implementation and also trying to gather feedback from the people on the team. And so I'm also, will tell you a little bit about, because the first area we looked at was curriculum and instructional materials. At the end, I'll kind of tell you a little bit about some of our next steps in the curriculum office. Next slide, Marcy. So you may remember from the equity policy that there are 9 clear areas delineated. Our first area of focus was around curriculum and instructional materials. Next slide. The language in the policy is this: adopting age-appropriate curriculum and instructional materials that teach equity, diversity, inclusion, anti-bias, and about the injustices people of color still face to this day. And I want to provide just a little bit of context for you. Marcy, you can go to the next slide. In the packet that was sent out, you saw the actual recommendations document that the task force has provided to Jeff. And I want to just kind of give you a little bit of context for reading that document. I'm sure you've already reviewed it, but some kind of perhaps helpful ways of understanding what each of the columns are about and how the conversation unfolded on the task force. That first column you see there that says equity focus, this is really an unpacking of the language in the equity policy. So what I just read from the last slide are the exact words on the policy, and then we've unpacked it to look at in more detail what that might mean for our schools and classrooms, and what the indicators of success might look like, how we will know if we're doing well in this area. The next column, the identified barriers to equity and inclusion, what you see is really a synthesis, a very, very simple synthesis of some complicated conversations we've had on the equity task force about what are the things that are happening in our schools right now that are really keeping us from getting to those markers of success. And then finally, that third column is a high-level notation of the recommendation to Jeff around how we can eliminate those barriers that were identified. So we want to take just a few minutes to walk through this document and talk about in more detail about the barriers and the recommendations that the task force has noted. Next slide, Marcy. So in that first column, equity focus, this is what I referred to as an unpacking of the equity policy language. These are the 4 indicators in short. So we believe that we will be hitting the mark around curriculum and instructional materials if children are regularly exposed to culturally relevant texts, that they're involved in culturally relevant projects, that our social studies curriculum presents social science from the viewpoint of multiple perspectives, and that we have in place curriculum or resources for teachers to teach kids explicitly about equity, diversity, inclusion, anti-bias, and social justice. I'll just make a note. Bhavna's going to step in and talk a little bit about the barriers and recommendations columns. One of the themes, though, before she jumps in, one of the themes that really developed on the team was that of alignment, that it really shouldn't, a student's exposure to diverse literature and culturally relevant projects and a high quality social studies curriculum and so on should not be determined by whether their teacher's interested in that topic. It really should be determined by, we have a program that provides this for students. And then another thing to keep in mind, I think, is we know that this topic, curriculum and instructional materials, is really closely connected to other areas of the equity policy, particularly professional development for teachers, also school climate, and probably we could go down the list and find connections to all of the others. But we really wanted to, just for the sake of clarity, to provide recommendations around this first topic. So we're holding on to some of the recommendations in other areas until we get there. With that, Bhavna, perhaps you can jump in and talk through the barriers and recommendations on the document.
I'm excited to share about that. Can I have the next slide, please, Marcy? So we want to give you a high-level overview of the barriers that our task force identified and the recommendations we had for Jeff. And the first and foremost is that lack of consistency in access and exposure to diverse books. I want us to think about this barrier, and the recommendation that you see there is around this idea of windows and mirrors, that our students have access to curriculum and books that are both windows and mirrors, and it's not just about diverse authors. Oftentimes we think about diverse authors as providing those windows. We want to also look at a variety of identities expressed in those books, diverse protagonists, that is also important for us in terms of selecting a diverse set of books for our students, and really kind of looking at it from this lens of real windows and mirrors. Like, do I have opportunities to look beyond what's my lived experience? And do I have opportunities to also be able to see my lived experiences expressed in the books that I'm reading? Next slide, please, Marcy. As Greg mentioned earlier, a theme that you will see run through our presentation today is around that alignment. We talked at length about the different experiences our task force members had around the projects that the students were doing, the field trips, and the traditions that were honoring racial and cultural diversity. And what we learned was exactly what Greg was talking about, that it kind of was dependent on where you were, which year you were in, what teacher you had. And we really want to build that predictability across our school system so that all of our students have access to these rich opportunities on our campuses. Next slide, please, Marcy. This generated a lot of conversation on our task force. We currently do not have a social studies curriculum that really reflects multiple perspectives on historical events, doesn't really reflect different ways of looking at historical events, doesn't reflect voices that were not the majority voices in those historical events as well. And we currently do not have a social studies curriculum out there that kind of meets those needs as well. So our recommendation to Jeff as a task force is to look into developing and curating curriculum and instruction that better align with the history social science framework. So that's something we do have sort of in our toolkit, is the new history social science framework. We do not yet have a curriculum out there that sort of mirrors the history social science framework fully, but we have the social science framework that actually does have standards that value historical inquiry and looking at multiple perspectives. So that's something that we also as a task force recommended to Jeff. Next slide, please. And so this would actually lead for me to share a little bit about the framework that we looked at. So again, this is about systematizing the work we do. We also looked into different standards out there, frameworks available, and we actually found the formerly teaching tolerance, the learning for justice framework, the social justice framework, a more comprehensive, developmentally appropriate framework that we want to look into to guide not just our instruction, to guide our selection of materials, guide our professional learning, but really look at systematizing that work that is within that framework. And I'll share a little bit more about that framework shortly. Next slide, please, Marcy. So I touched on it briefly, but why use an anti-bias framework? Why do we need to kind of look at a framework to guide our work? First of all, this framework provides a real clear picture of student outcomes. There are grade level bands, K2, 3, 5, 6, 8, 9, 12 bands, and they identify specific learning outcomes at each of those bands. And those are, so we found them to be age appropriate, developmentally appropriate, and really something that as educators, we can leverage to do our equity work in our classrooms as well. They are a great guide, an excellent guide, a comprehensive guide for curriculum development and curation. So again, putting our work through the lens of this framework will help us not just systematize the work, but also be able to have a framework to use for all of our future professional learning as well. And it's our first step in alignment across classrooms. As Greg mentioned earlier, I shared through as I was sharing about the barriers, that is the number one sort of topic that has come up in our task force conversations, is that alignment system-wide in our school district. Next slide, please. So I wanted to share a little bit about how this framework is organized. What I appreciate about this framework is that there are clear domains identified, first of all, identity, diversity, justice, and action. And within those 4 domains, there are clear anchor standards identified. In addition, there are grade level bands, as I shared earlier. And within those grade level bands, each of these anchor standards have developmentally appropriate learning outcomes identified. And there are scenarios that illustrate what that outcome would look like. And so we found this to be by far the most comprehensive set of anti-bias social justice rooted framework out there that not only gives us the guidelines on the domains that we are looking at, but also provides us with developmentally appropriate guidance and scenarios that we can actually use to further our learning as a staff. Next slide, please. So I want to just share a little bit about the 4 domains, and I'm going to read just a couple of standards, anchor standards, just to sort of illustrate what each of these 4 domains are. So for example, for identity, one of the standards that sort of exemplifies what identity truly means within this anti-bias framework is, as an example, students will recognize that people's multiple identities interact and create unique and complex individuals. Now, this seems like a language-heavy standard, right? But when you go into the grade level bands, it's actually identified in a grade level appropriate learning outcome. Diversity is another domain, and an example of the anchor standard is students will respectfully express curiosity about the history and lived experiences of others and will exchange ideas and beliefs in an open-minded way. And this is just one example of the standard, the anchor standard, but it exemplifies what we are reaching for. What we are aiming for. And again, developmentally appropriate language used in the learning outcomes in the grade level bands. Justice, students will analyze the harmful impact of bias and injustice on the world historically and today. And I think that speaks to how Jeff linked our two agenda items earlier before we started our presentation as well. So again, that's a great example of what justice means. And as far as action domain is concerned, it kind of speaks to both the individual actions, the individual responsibility, as well as the collective action that our students can engage in to speak up against the bias and injustice in the world. And we will evaluate what strategies are effective when you're taking collective action. And so again, you know, each of the grade level bands identify the anchor standards within this, this domain. Next slide, please. And Greg, you're up.
If you go back to that recommendations document, you'll see in the third column under recommendations that there are two recommendations, additional ones there that Bhavna hasn't talked about yet. One of them is connected to two barriers, and it has to do with professional development for teachers. And that the recommendation is that if LASD is going to put into place some new social studies resources for teachers to use and an anti-bias framework, that teachers really need training to use those materials. So the recommendation is to provide teachers with the professional development they need to use them. And then the final recommendation, Marcy, if you don't mind going to the next slide, is just that LASD regularly review progress toward meeting goals in this area and share those updates with the community. Next slide, Marcy. So I want to, just as we wrap up here, want to share some next steps. At the beginning, I talked about how Bhavna and Sarah and I are kind of wearing two hats here, both our LASD, the work we do in implementation, and also the work we're doing here in task force to provide some feedback about the implementation. And so I want to talk a little bit about both. Our next area of focus is the work we'll be doing with the task force next. And so we know we kind of we've done one of 9 areas, and you know, it took us a while to get through that first one. So we know that we might need to like speed up the pace of the work a little bit in some way. The group has become a bit more cohesive at this point. And we've started to kind of work out what our processes are and will be. And so I'm hopeful that we can pick up the pace a little bit so that we can move more quickly through some of the upcoming areas. There seems to be, and we have not finalized what the next area of focus will be, but there seems to be quite a lot of interest in both professional development as a topic on the task force, or school climate as a topic on the task force. So I imagine that we'll be going there next, one of those areas, or perhaps both together, because they have some really close ties. As far as the LASD implementation, I have a unique perspective because we chose curriculum and instructional materials, and I work in the curriculum and instruction office, and we're really quite excited to be able to work under Jeff's direction to begin to implement many of the things that were recommended by the task force, and are already taking some action to ensure that we have some things in place for the fall in pretty much every area that the task force has made recommendations. So that's kind of what we wanted to share with you tonight. We'd love to answer any questions you have about anything, how it's been working, or our next steps.
Greg, why don't we do just to put on the radar, the to-do on the next slide?
Okay.
And then we'll go back to that. So what was brought to, and I thank you, Greg and Bhavna, for the outstanding presentation of the work that's going on. I also appreciate, because I live just a couple of doors down from the curriculum and instruction office, I am able to stop in and see the work unfolding from this task force. So it's quite gratifying. And Greg and I touch base periodically on this too, and keeps me abreast of what's going on. I think it will be helpful also to, as I'm just thinking about this, Greg, it will be helpful for the board and public to see as we move on, as the task force moves on to the next area, also to reach back and fill in on the actionable items that have actually taken place, right? Either be it materials that have been purchased or professional development that's been implemented, whatever that might be.
Right.
But there's an action attached to this agenda item this evening, and that is around this this framework, right? This anti-bias framework. And I know you heard Bhavna talk about this, and so we're looking for board approval on this. The full framework was attached to the agenda, so I'm sure you have seen that, but it really is our first step in aligning across the district. It's what we will map our work to. It'll also guide, as you heard, the curriculum development and really what we're looking for in terms of students and what they do, their outcomes. So if there are questions about this, we'd love for those to be asked at this point too. But just a reminder that we are looking for action to formally adopt this framework as a part of what we use in LASD.
Maybe I can add one thought that I had while you were saying that, Jeff. We did bring this framework to the Curriculum Council just to share it with them and get some feedback. The general consensus, particularly among teachers, parents seemed very happy to see that we were interested in making a move in this direction. Teachers were also very excited to see that there would be something that would help provide some definition to what we wanted kids to know, understand, do, and become because they're in our schools.
Thanks, Greg. Board members, do any of you have any clarifying questions on this presentation? Vladimir.
Did the task force, I have two questions. The first one is whether you asked for input from our previous equity consultant, Dr. Avelar LaSalle.
Around the topic of curriculum and instruction?
Around your proposal?
No, we did not.
Okay. Are you, and the second question is, are you familiar with the National Academy of Sciences report from 2019 called Measuring Educational Equity?
Not by name.
Okay.
Any other questions before I take public comment? Steve?
Kind of piggybacks on what Vladimir is going to, is in developing this, did we pull in any other outside sources to help frame out what we did? Or did you guys create this organically internally?
No, we used multiple sources. One of the ones that was really instrumental was the county's Ways to Equity playbook. And then we consulted a resource. I cannot remember do you remember who produced the scorecard? I think that came out of in New York.
Yes, I don't remember. We kind of looked at multiple sources. It was around culturally responsive teaching, a scorecard for that, and we kind of looked at the indicators on there. And I just want to remind us that this is not a framework we created. It is part of the multiple sources we looked at, and this is the framework because it has grade level bands and clear learning outcomes for each band is the framework we landed on. But we looked at multiple resources to kind of understand how can we provide that alignment that actually speaks to multiple aspects of equity, because equity is not a monolithic kind of concept.
Any other questions before I take public comment? All right, great, thanks. We will now take public comment on this agenda item. To comment on this agenda item, members of the public should use the raise hand button if using the Zoom app, or press *9 if using your phone. Your name will be announced when it is your turn to speak. Prior to providing your comment, please be sure your microphone is on. Each speaker will be given 3 minutes. And it looks like we do have someone for public comment. Tomer?
Our first speaker is Tomer Sharon.
Yeah, thank you. So I wanted to ask, first of all, it's great that we're introducing these types of topics and the structure around them. What's the plan to share some of this curriculum with the parents? And I bring that up because some of these topics can be pretty controversial, and we've seen that kind of at the state level. And Gavin Newsom having to veto some of the things that were created, and I think some injustices are everybody agrees with, and some maybe less so. And so, how do we maybe share that in advance with the parents and get feedback from the community? I think that would be helpful. And then maybe on the topic of diversity, one of the things I'm curious about is, one of my daughters is in middle school, and I encouraged her to take computer science and as one of the electives. And then she came home and she said, "Dad, only 2 of the 15 are girls." So even within our own school, what can we do more, maybe even at the elementary school level, to lead to more diversity within our own classes? Thanks.
Thank you, Tomer. Okay, it doesn't look like we have anybody else for public comment. So I'm going to go ahead and close public comment. And would any board members like to provide comment? Jessica?
I really just want to say how awesome this work is, and how great sorry, I'm not eloquent at 9:30 at night. I just really wanted to emphasize how great this is. I look forward to approving this framework. I wish I was subject to this framework as a child myself. That, I'm glad that we're righting the wrongs of what we grew up with this. So thank you very much. As it relates to parents having input on curriculum, maybe one of you can explain what Curriculum Council is, and maybe Jeff, you can explain that. Well, at least tell parents from the board highlights too. Anyway, that's it.
Yeah, Sandra, why don't you start with Curriculum Council, and then I'll get into the broader communication.
Sure. Curriculum Council is our board sanctioned, I'm not sure the right language, community group that is comprised of parents, teachers, and administrators. And the job really is to look closely at any curricular adoptions. This is a framework adoption, which is really different. We did run, we introduced the idea at Curriculum Council, but none of our frameworks, right? The frameworks are really typically developed in core curricular areas by the state. And this particular framework is probably the most well-known framework around anti-bias and social justice teachings. But if we get to the place where we will adopt social studies curriculum or adopt anti-bias curriculum, that would go through the Curriculum Council process. And it always includes a period of parent feedback. We're going through the process right now of a TK5 math adoption. And so something will be going out to families in April for that parent feedback part. It's my plug for
there's a review opportunity, right? Where where the community can review the materials being considered for adoption during that time. In terms of, Jessica, your question about the broader communication, we will absolutely be communicating this with parents through an update. There will definitely be links to the framework that's been adopted as well, so that everyone is aware of that. We will, and that's the board communication. We'll also do a separate internal communication with our staff, share with them, allow them to become familiar with it. Undoubtedly, there will be a professional development that springboards from the adoption of this anti-bias framework.
I just want to add a small comment for the parents at home who might be wondering. Just thinking about Tamer's comment, this anti-bias framework is not the same as an ethnic studies curriculum, correct? So I just really want to make that completely clear. Any other comments? Here, Brian, and then Vladimir.
Yeah, just to say, so thank you for all of your work on this. I don't have any problem with the framework. It looks like a good framework. I think the last couple of points in the 6 to 8 bucket sort of start to walk up to that line of political advocacy versus education, which, as the parent has said, can be a hot button issue, but I don't have any problem with it. I do want to be sensitive to our teachers who are struggling this year a lot. So by all means, I want to make this training available to teachers who are excited about it. I want to be a little cautious, I think, over the next 12 to 18 months about imposing, new things on our teachers, like telling them they got to throw away. Last thing I want to do is tell teachers they have to throw away their lesson plans and create new lesson plans on top of everything else. So I just want to
confirmed.
Yeah, so I wanted to say that.
Conscious of that, yes,
and acknowledge that for the teachers, and other than that, I look forward in seeing how these efforts evolve.
Thanks, Brian. Vladimir?
I have a couple of comments. I have no dispute with what's been presented so far. I think it's fine. It attacks a real problem, and I think we should move forward. But I do have a concern about what's been left out of the discussion. And what I'm referring to is how residential segregation causes school segregation. And although it's true that we as a district can't affect residential segregation, that's an issue that the state needs to consider, and that's something the federal government needs to consider. There are some things that we can do to mitigate the effects of residential segregation. Namely, what we can do is we can accept more inter-district transfer students from neighboring districts. At a high level, ignoring a whole bunch of things, we are down about 1,000 students from where we were a couple of years ago. So one could say that we have excess capacity. That's not completely true, but there's something in there. And by admitting students from other districts, we would start to break the link between zip code and educational outcomes. What you've presented so far, I think, is an inward-looking framework. And what we've neglected is the outer-looking framework. I'm not particularly attached to inter-district transfers as something, and I'm more than willing to consider other alternatives that don't involve inter-district transfer, but I think that we're ignoring a much larger problem, and that is essentially how residential segregation causes school segregation. So for me, although I don't have any objection to what you presented, I think it's incomplete. And so I would want us to approve this plan only with the explicit request that you come back with consideration of the larger picture of inequities in our education system and what we can do in turn, what we can do to change that. And the reason I bring up interdistrict transfers is because I know that that's one thing that would change that. And I'm not attached to that particular solution, but I think we need to do something in that area. And so my suggestion is that we approve with the condition that you come back with some steps to alleviate the consequences of residential segregation.
Can I make a comment on that?
Oh, sure.
So in order to do that, that will change the charge of the group, because the charge of the group was to utilize the existing board policy and evaluate the current district status measured against that policy. I mean, Vladimir, I understand what you're asking for. It's an entirely different body of work.
So I recall that when we discussed this particular forming this task force, that something along those lines was, I mentioned in the sort of response about something along those lines. But I don't see that we have done anything, moved it forward in any way towards that. And what I'm asking for is for us to move forward. So maybe I'll amend my suggestion to say that we'll approve this particular plan as long as we take up the issue, board policy issue, of looking at the larger picture. Because in one sense, what we do internally, our kids are going to do fine because they come from high socioeconomic status families. They can afford tutors. They don't have to worry about food insecurity, blah, 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 right? So looking internally at our students and the inequities is ignoring a much larger problem. And that's what I'd like us to consider.
But Vladimir, not all of our students come from high SES families.
Oh, no, I understand.
Right.
But in general, that's the case, right?
And other board members certainly chime in with your opinions. My opinion is that we should not tie the motion to approve this framework with anything else, because the charge of this group is to look internally, is to look into how we can improve along these lines for LASD. So
I would say I'm sympathetic to Vladimir's larger point, and I'm willing to have that discussion, but I don't believe it's on our agenda tonight. And so I'm not in favor of attaching that to the question of whether we approve this framework.
Yeah, I'm definitely sympathetic to that also. And I think that there's, like Brian said, it's an agenda item for another meeting, but I think that that is something separate that we need to look at, independent of this framework.
I agree with Shally and Brian on this, and what Jeff said about the charge of this group. The charge of this group was to implement our equity policy for LASD, for our community, our constituents. Talking about bringing in more constituents or more students is something for an agenda on another day. But I'm very sympathetic, for sure, to it. We are an affluent district, but as Shally said, we do have low SES students, so we're not exclusively an affluent district.
So I'm Steve. Go ahead if you have something.
No, I was just going to be. I'm trying to line up with the other the 4 board members or 3 board members who spoke. That was my understanding as well. But this focus really was about how do we look at our curriculum, how do we look at our policies internally of how we treat students that are here, and make sure they are broadening their horizons and have a better view of the world coming out of once they leave the district. I understand what you're saying, that the way education is structured in California, not just in our district, is inequitable and needs to be addressed. I would like to look at that as a bigger picture of how we address that, not just as a district, I guess is where I'm coming from a little bit. I understand that little or efforts that we make will have an impact, but I'd like to see how do those efforts get made in a bigger context? And I think that's a different conversation for me.
So, Charlie, you want to say something? Sorry, before I.
Oh, no, go ahead.
So I'm willing to vote for this approval of this, provided I have an informal agreement that we will take up the larger issue at some time.
Sure. I mean, I would love to take up that discussion as well. Definitely. Do we have any other comments on this agenda item before we look for a vote? No. Okay. Then may I? Oh, yes. Go ahead, Vladimir. No, it's okay.
I heard you say that you were willing to look at this at some future time. I think I heard Jessica say and Brian say that, and also Steve. Is that correct?
That's what I heard.
And I'd want to, where I'm coming from is I'd like to look at it in a bigger context, not just us alone. If we're looking at it, I'm going to look at how do we do this in concert with other districts around us. It's one of the things we did. I know that we've offended districts in the past by saying, oh, you can't educate as well as we are, so we're going to bring your child in. That's actually statements that were made by previous board members. I don't want to run down that path again. It's taking us a while to repair that damage. So if we're going to go down that path, I want to be doing it with them, not to them. So it means structuring a different conversation for me. And it's going to take a lot of other boards willing to step in and have that conversation with us versus us coming up with a plan independent of that would be, I'm going to be very careful about doing, because like I said, cities and around us and boards around us have been offended by our approach in the past. So if we want to pursue this, we need to talk about how we pursue it. And I don't think it'd be done in a vacuum. It has to be done in a very inclusive way. And it might be something we have to look to the county to help us sponsor or somebody else to help us sponsor. What does that mean? Does that mean bringing students in? Or does it mean sharing what we've done? Because we've done a lot of innovative things and helping other districts see what could be adaptable. I mean, that's a concern. I just would have a very big concern about that. As an approach, that's all.
Are we all okay to put this to a vote now? Yep. Okay. Then may I please have a motion to approve using Teaching Tolerance Anti-Bias Framework as a guiding document for the teaching of equity, diversity, inclusion, anti-bias, and social justice.
So moved.
Thank you, Brian. Can I have a second, please?
Second.
Thank you, Jessica. Let me see. Any further board discussion? Nope. Okay. The motion to approve using the Teaching Tolerance Anti-Bias Framework as a guiding document for the teaching of equity, diversity, inclusion, anti-bias, and social justice was made by Brian and seconded by Jessica. I will now take a roll call vote. Jessica.
Yes.
Steve.
Yes.
Vladimir.
I'll vote yes.
Brian.
Yes.
I too vote yes. Motion passes unanimously. And thank you so much, Greg, Bhavna, and the rest of the leadership team on the Equity Task Force. It is truly a pleasure to serve on that task force. There's some great conversations there.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. All righty. We're going to move on to our next agenda item, resolution number 20/21-11, denouncing hate crimes targeting Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. In LASD, we value and teach equity, diversity, and inclusion. In light of recent race-related attacks and killings in our nation, The Board of Trustees will consider approving a resolution in support of all our students and families. Mr. Bayer.
Right, I would expand that to all of our students, families, and staff members.
Yep.
Yeah, as I said in advance of the second agenda item, I really think it's critical that we as a school district, and how we do this formally is through board resolution, is make a strong statement against the violence that has occurred and is occurring against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. It's certainly not who we are as a school district, and I think it's important that we stand up and make that known. So with that, Charlie, I'll hand it off to you for board discussion and consideration of the resolution.
Great, thank you. Any clarifying questions? I know you've all seen a copy of the resolution. Anything on the resolution you want to ask about before I open up to public comment? Nope. Okay. We will now take public comment on this agenda item. To comment on this agenda item, members of the public should use the raise hand button if using the Zoom app, or press *9 if using your phone. Your name will be announced when it is your turn to speak. Prior to providing your comment, please be sure your microphone is on. Each speaker will be given 3 minutes. And I see we do have someone for public comment.
Our first speaker is Pepe Yu.
Hi, everyone. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
I'm Pepe, and I'm a parent at Almond. And I just wanted to thank you all for considering this resolution against anti-Asian hate. You know, in my view, I think the escalating acts of hate that have been happening in the past year has actually been happening throughout U.S. history. I think a lot of us feel surprised, but I think for those of us who have spent a lot of time reading U.S. history, we know that this discrimination is often, you know, happening when there's a need for scapegoats for economic hardship. So I think it's really important to highlight this issue in our school community. The struggle for equity and fairness for the AAPI community is heavily intertwined with the struggle of other communities like the Black and Latinx communities, or the struggle for girls and women, as a previous parent had highlighted. I still remember walking to school as a child and having kids yell at me to go back to my own country. That's what I remember of elementary school. So it means very much to me, and I'm sure many others in the school district, that you all take a stand for equity, especially for a population that makes up a non-trivial portion of the community. Thank you again for considering this resolution and making sure everyone in our community knows that we all have a place in the rainbow that makes up America.
Thank you, Pepe. Let's see, do we have any other public comment? Okay, I don't see any other hands raised for public comments. I'm going to go ahead and close that. Board members, want to make any comments? Vladimir.
Thank you, Pepe, for speaking up. I wholeheartedly approve of this resolution.
Thank you, Vladimir. And I'm really glad that we are passing this, well, that we are voting on this tonight. Oh boy. Okay. May I please have a motion to approve resolution number 20/21-11, denouncing hate crimes targeting Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders?
So moved.
Thank you, Vladimir. May I please have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Jessica. Any further board discussion? Nope. Okay, great. The motion to approve resolution 20/21-11, denouncing hate crimes targeting Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, was made by Vladimir and seconded by Jessica. We'll now do a roll call vote. Jessica.
Yes.
Steve.
Yes.
Vladimir.
Yes.
Brian.
Yes.
I too vote yes. Motion passes unanimously. Oh, good. I think it's really important to take a stand on these kinds of things. Racism is like a virus that spreads, so thank you. I should also point out that our school district is a member of the Asian Pacific Islanders School Board Member Association. So very proud of us. Okay, next now, Collective Bargaining Agreement, CSEA, the Board of Trustees will consider approving the 2020-21 negotiated agreement with the district's classified staff, CSEA. Mr. Kenyon.
Thanks, Shelley. This item is on second time for you. You had it as a discussion item at the last board meeting. Tonight it's an action item for you to hopefully approve the tentative agreement we have with our classified bargaining unit. Essentially, it entails a 2% raise for the current year. You have, again, the disclosure of the financial impact. You also have, as part of your packet, a letter from the county office indicating that they believe that we can meet our financial obligations even after we settle on this specific collective bargaining agreement. So I'm going to recommend to you that you approve this and turn it back to you for discussion and questions.
Great, thank you, Randy. Any questions from the board members for Randy before we take public comment? Vladimir?
Just want to clarify, I think that it's, you've said this before, our expectation is that we will go back next year to negotiate for 2 years and 3 years. Years 2 and years 3. This is only for 1 year, and we have potentially negotiations for year 2 and year 3 in the contract.
That's correct.
Any other questions for Randy? Okay. We will now take public comment on this agenda item. To comment on this agenda item, members of the public should use the raise hand button if using the Zoom app, or press *9 if using your phone. Your name will be announced when it is your turn to speak. Prior to providing your comment, please be sure your microphone is on. Each speaker will be given 3 minutes. And I do not see any hands raised for public comment, so I'm going to go ahead and close public comment at this point. Would any board members like to provide any further comments on this agenda item? Nope. Okay, then may I please have a motion to approve the CSEA collective bargaining agreement?
So moved.
Thank you, Vladimir. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Jessica. Any further board discussion? Great. The motion to approve the CSEA collective bargaining agreement was made by Vladimir and seconded by Jessica. We will now do a roll call vote. Jessica?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Vladimir?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
I too vote yes. Motion passes unanimously. It's great. I'm glad we were able to do that. All right, on to our next agenda item. Comprehensive schools. Oh, sorry, Vladimir.
Point of
yes.
order. It's 10 o'clock.
Oh, yes.
Vladimir
So
beat me to it.
It's really helpful to have like past presidents as parliamentarians on this board. Well, I'm just gonna ask before I ask for a motion to continue the meeting. Do we want to take a quick 5-minute break? Does anyone need to take a break? Nope, nope. Okay, then may I please have a motion to continue this meeting past 10 o'clock p.m.
So moved.
Thank you, Vladimir. Can I have a second?
Second.
I'm gonna give it to Brian. The motion to continue tonight's school board meeting past 10 o'clock p.m. was made by Vladimir and seconded by Brian. Any further discussion? Seeing none.
That's okay.
Okay. Roll call vote. Jessica?
Yes.
Steve?
Yeah, okay.
Vladimir?
Yes.
Brian?
Yes.
I too vote yes. Motion passes unanimously. We shall continue our meeting. Next agenda item, comprehensive school safety plans. Ms. Green will present each school safety plan for consideration of approval. Aaron, or should I give it to, says Jeff?
No, go ahead, Aaron.
Okay.
Thank you for approving going past 10 o'clock because I'm up an hour past my bedtime. So,
And not taking a break.
yeah, thank you so much. So anyway, here I am again. I think the last time I've been in front of you regarding a board presentation was a year ago when we presented the 10 site plans for the comprehensive safety plans. And then immediately after that, we launched into the pandemic. So hold on. Marcy, you can move on to the next slide, please. So tonight's presentation will outline the updates for each of the site's comprehensive safety plans. And as I mentioned, they're updated annually by the site and then also by the district based on board policy changes and then also changes in best safety practices. We can go on. Next slide, thank you. In addition to the safety plan, the components that we've focused on are crisis response, suicide prevention and mental health. And then last spring, we added the infectious disease pandemic response comprehensive plan. And then as you can see, safety is a priority in our district for all of these reasons. And we make sure that we're in legal compliance with all of the different components. And then the next slides, we're going to go through each school briefly. The next slides will outline the site goals, and I'll just refresh your memory that each school and each site has goals around the physical environment of the site, and then also around the caring climate and social emotional needs of the site. So I'll start with sharing the district's updates. So just in general, since these goals were approved last year and we went immediately into the pandemic, for the most part, all of the sites have kept their exact same goals and are focusing on implementing those now as they are back in the hybrid model. But the green highlights are things that are new that have been added this year. And many of them are based on the pandemic that we've been dealing with this year. So for the district, for our goals, we added the mandatory bloodborne pathogen training and then also suicide awareness training for all staff in LASD. We thought that was very important for us to do that. And then something that we've been focusing on this year particularly is providing one-on-one support and therapy for staff, and then adding in some different supports for supporting our mental health of all of our staff in different ways. So as you can see, if there's green highlights, the green highlights are what have been added this year. And just kind of an overview, we're going to browse through these pretty quickly because I think you all have copies of each comprehensive plan. But the green highlights, most of them you'll notice are focused on mental health. That's been a huge focus this year. And I know you've heard that theme woven into many topics tonight. So maybe scan this one. Thank you, Marcy. If there's no green, there's no ads. So just to reiterate again, most of the green that you did see, they were around the mental health supports and what we can do to really be in tune with our staff and students. Do you have any questions or comments?
Board members, any questions? Vladimir?
Erin, would you say in general that the plans for all the different schools are substantially the same except for exit routes?
For the most part, yes, because well, many of them are board policies, right? Like there's so many board policies. There are all of the last components, like what to do if there were an airplane crash, what to do if there were, and all of the different disasters. So I would say yes. The only thing that's different are the goals and then some of the actions that the sites are taking to meet those. So that's in addition to also their safety teams and their emergency response teams.
All right, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Erin, I just had a couple of quick questions. So if a goal is not it's not listed in the matrices you showed us, does that mean that the school already has something like that in place? Like, for example, Santa Rita, right, has
Yeah.
informed families about mental health resources and
Yeah.
increased access. So does that mean that the other schools already have such a thing in place?
You know, not necessarily, but that's a practice that all of our psychologists have those resources. All of our schools have those resources. I think it's something that Greg and his team at Santa Rita wanted to focus more on to make sure that since he wanted them to have those at his fingertips. So he was really being more deliberate and maybe doing different outreach. But I would say it's not, I don't know how to answer. I think I'm not answering your question, but it doesn't mean that everybody has that as a standard. It's just something that they're focused on this year.
It doesn't mean they're not doing it.
Correct.
And I think part of Greg's effort was recognizing he has a very multilingual community.
Yes.
And so that they wanted to raise that and elevate that to the goal level.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Because I think it did show up on the mental health survey that we looked at.
Yes.
A few board meetings ago.
And he actually took that from the data, the Hanover data.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Excellent. All righty. Any other questions from board members? Okay, we will now take public comment on this agenda item.
Sorry, Charlotte, can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I was slow getting my hand up. We've had some questions in the past, sometimes related to this item, but sometimes for others, from parents about just kind of the general security of our campuses, right? Which historically are very open. Many of them have back entrances. And I don't know if there's an update. I didn't see anything in the plans about, we've talked about adding cameras or trying to set up more systematic paradigms for trying to make sure that somebody in the office knows when people come on campus. So I don't know if there's any update to be shared. It's not clear to me whether that should live in this document or not, or whether it's part of some other discussion. So I just wanted to kind of ask if there's an update around that kind of stuff, or whether there's some other topic that should be a part of at some point.
Yeah, I think that likely isn't in there because it is part of a district-wide initiative. Randy, maybe you can provide an update on that? Just the idea of cameras on campuses. It's one initiative we have going.
Yeah, we're working with the company that actually did the EV charging stations, installing cameras. We have cameras in all the parking lots where the EV charging stations are that monitor the parking lots. And we've got cameras planned for all the campuses throughout the campus. We've already installed cameras at both Egan and Block, and they're up and working. And our next two schools that we're headed to is Loyola and Covington. As we phase this in, it takes a week or so to do one school. Okay, and we're somewhat at the behest of the company as to what else is going on in their schedule. So it's not every week, but we're not having work done every week. So over the course of the next several weeks, we should get through the rest of the schools, the elementary campuses.
Gotcha, thanks.
Great. Thank you. Okay, I'll go ahead and take public comment. To comment on this agenda item, members of the public should use the raise hand button if using the Zoom app, or press *9 if using your phone. Your name will be announced when it is your turn to speak. Prior to providing your comment, please be sure your microphone is on. Each speaker will be given 3 minutes. And I do not see any hands raised for public comment, so I'm closing it. Would any board members like to provide comment on this agenda item? No. Okay, great. Then may I please have a motion to approve the comprehensive school safety plans?
So moved.
Thank you, Vladimir. May I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Jessica. Any further board discussion? Great. The motion to approve the comprehensive school safety plans was made by Vladimir and seconded by Jessica. We should now do a roll call vote. Jessica?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Vladimir? Vladimir?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to comment that we woke Steve up, but in fact, he woke me up. Yes.
Thanks. Brian?
Yes.
I too vote yes. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you all very much. All righty.
Thank you.
Thanks, Erin. All right, our last agenda item in this section, Legislative Action Week. Board members and staff will report on activities and discussions from this year's Legislative Action Week. Jeff, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I know that each spring or March, I guess it is, there is a, when we are in person, there's a Legislative Action Day where some of us go up to the state capitol to make our voices heard. With COVID in place, Legislative Action Week took place, and we thought it would be a good idea to provide an opportunity for those of you who attended to just recap what occurred. So with that, Shali.
Thanks, Jeff. Anybody want to start us off? Okay, go ahead, Brian.
Well, you can go if you want. Shali and I both attended the session with Senator Becker, which was without Senator Becker because the Senate was still in session. So we spoke with his staff and went through the CSBA talking points that I'm sure all of us on this call saw. And I don't know if Shali has follow-up, but I have none yet.
Yeah, I also attended the one with Assembly Member Berman, and he was there, actually. And yes, like Brian said, we go through these CSBA talking points, so we don't really get to advocate for stuff that's very particular to our school district. So, but it was great. You know, I would much rather it be in person because it's more fun in person. Yeah, but I mean, that was about it. It was a little bit, it was great, but it was a little anticlimactic. But very well organized by CSBA. I will say that.
I don't know about the organization because I signed up and did not ever get any Zoom details for either one of them. I did get details as to the time of Berman's. I didn't put it in my calendar because it said I would be getting Zoom details. Anyway, besides the point, it's fun. It was a technical difficulty, and I'm glad you guys got to go. But I've been focusing more on my own advocating on the very real things we had to deal with through email and whatnot as it related to getting our teachers vaccinated, and then really trying to get better guidance on the distancing. Because I wanted details, not, oh, 4 feet may be okay. That didn't make me feel comfortable. So, and we got that. I'm not saying it was me, it was probably a bunch of other people too. But yeah, but I don't like that we have to stick to those talking points for those meetings.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. And I think that our board does a lot of we have a lot of access to our electeds and we make use of it. And so I'm really glad about that. Should I take public comment? Really? Okay, Jeff is saying yes, I have to take public comment. We will now take public comment on this agenda item. To comment on this agenda item, members of the public should use the raise hand button if using the Zoom app, or press *9 if using your phone. Your name will be announced when it is your turn to speak. Prior to providing your comment, please be sure your microphone is on. Each speaker will be given 3 minutes. And I see no hands raised for public comment, so I'm going to close public comment. Any further comments on this agenda item? Okay. Moving on, board and administration comments. Sandra.
I think I'm going to pass tonight.
Okay. Randy?
I'll pass too.
Jeff?
I don't have anything other than I just wanted to hear you read that comment again.
I can read it super fast too, by the way. Tell you. Anyway, let's go on to our board. Jessica?
I got nothing.
I still feel like I'm being hazed and I've been in this role for 3 months. Just kidding. Just kidding. Steve? Vladimir?
No.
Brian?
Nothing.
I actually do have one thing I want to mention just quickly. I went to the PTA leadership meeting almost 2 weeks ago, but since our last meeting, one of the things that the PTAs and the LEF Foundation are talking about is combining their fundraising efforts into something that's being called the One Community effort. So I had a conversation just yesterday with Heather McDonald and Kathy Chi, and recommended that they talk to us at an upcoming meeting about that effort. It's going to take, it's, as you can imagine, once you get down to the weeds of trying to combine the fundraising outreach and then parcel the money on the back end, it gets extremely complicated. But I think it'd be good for us to just kind of all be on the same page of what they're trying to do and why and where it is.
Great, thank you. I have nothing other than I attended the Santa Clara County Children's Summit last Friday. It was really good. And that's about it. All right, meeting adjourned. Thank you for hanging in there with us. Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Good night. Sandra's got her jacket on. She's out of here.